We now have pretty much time for panel discussion, so I think after every panel we also have like 10-15 minutes for Q&A. I think it will be like more interesting for audience to participate and to be involved, right? If you have any question about organizing, or if you need to go earlier and not participate in lunch, also please inform our staff down there in the lobby. Also, feel free to know more information about Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, which is organized by Robert Alatov and his colleagues. Also, Michelle Bachman, his co-chair, very famous person here in this club. So they have website Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, and they start this breakfast in directly in Knesset, in Parliament of Israel. And our think tank, Institute for Democracy and Development, we do analytical work and educational work in the territory of Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and here in United States. So feel free to come to our website, Institute PolitA US, to read our last reports. It was reports about Russian disinformation work in Europe and here in United States, also report about religious freedom, and last our article about Ukrainian mineral deal. So maybe you will be interested to read about that, because it will be time of our third panel discussion. Yeah, and also our third partner is Jewish Orthodox Chamber of Commerce. Duvi is here. He is head of this organization, and he also a rabbi who will help us also to read Tehillim and prayers this morning. And they were very active worldwide, and they do a lot of humanitarian work in Israel and in Ukraine. So Duvi's relatives originally organized all refugee schools in Europe for Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian-speaking Jewish people after Second World War. So his family, and then they help a lot to Ukrainian rabbis, to Rabbi Asman. So thank you to Duvi for that, and thank you for being our partner today. And one more housekeeping note: if you need kosher food, unfortunately we haven't kosher breakfast, but we order from Char Bar blood kosher food. For it will be available 11:45 here. So if you need this special catering, you can ask Malka to help with that. Okay. Who is morning person here? So, or more evening person? I'm not morning person. Yeah, I see a lot of people who work in public policy and not morning person. I think we're ready to start, because we have also our partners here. And also these meetings will be recorded for our website. And if you take part in panel discussion, please also inform about your concern to be recorded and to be published on YouTube of our organizations. I think it will be useful for other people who explore foreign policy and peacekeeping process to watch this video later. So that's it about organizing issue. Now also I will give a little like remarks about our aim today. So generally idea of Robert to organize Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast was coming from Israel Parliament, from Knesset. It's a very special place. And it's very special feeling there. And for me, it reminds also a story of building Mishkan. It's Jewish temple where a lot of people, somebody donate, for example, their jubilee, their gold, their work hours to build like generally a place for prayer. But in Jewish culture, you don't need like directly special place for prayer. You can gather here 10 Jewish people and it will be place for prayer. But this work together to change this material world to some spiritual level, to some important mission, it's very good symbol for us today for panel discussion, for peacekeeping, to understand that our work and our work together with prayer really can make difference today. And that's why we want today not only discuss like classical like political notes about foreign policy, we want to discuss also how to make this material work more spiritual, how to stop the wars, and also in Jewish tradition, when Moshiach will come, everything will be understandable, and generally will be no wars. So hope on these meetings we will move more quicker to this aim. And also, I thanks to Pastor Bishop Benjamin for joining us. Thank you for Dubi, who also have status of rabbi, for joining today. And if the next minutes, also Robert can join us to explain story of Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast and aims of Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast. It's will be great, because I think this story must be story of every parliament, where we pray for wisdom of people who in charge. Because if they in charge, they generally have a mission, and their choices, it's very important, and we pray for their wisdom. Robert, if you have time to make keynote speech about Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast and about your mission, please do so. And thank you so much for coming from Israel direct here to Capitol Hill Club. Thank you, Robert.
It's hard to call keynote speaker because it's greetings, but not keynote speaker. I'll join to all the panels. Of course, I would like to explain a little bit about Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast that we started 9 years ago, and at the end of this month we gathering together with many leaders from all the world in Jerusalem and Waldorf Astoria. With me here, some of the founders and friends of Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, Adam Schindler, Jacob, our friends and very big supporters here in the United States. We are working with thousands of pastors around the world. We are build this direct dialogue between pastors and Jews and rabbis, parliamentarians, media, influential media groups to explain about the importance of Jerusalem, united Jerusalem, one Jerusalem. There is no two Jerusalems. It's impossible to imagine by the Bible two Jerusalems. And to whom belong Jerusalem? It's written in the Bible more than 3,000 years. So to recognize Jerusalem as a Jewish state city, the important Jewish city, and Zionism, we can explain. You know, Zionism is one of the names of Jerusalem. So the idea of Zionism is to build, rebuild, and to unite Jerusalem as a Jewish city, holy city. And of course, this dream, the Zionism dream, became true as it's written in the Bible. So the idea of Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast is to speak about Bible truth, it's a Bible story, it's a history of Jewish nation. And not only Jewish nation today, it's a Christian, even Muslims. Even Muslims know and written in the Quran that the Jewish state, that today Palestine belongs to the Jews. It's written in the Quran, not only in the Bible. All the historical documents explain about it, talking about it, but nobody wants to see and to hear the truth. And our mission with Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast is to pray and to explain about biblical truth. Very simple. So Christians and Jews and even Muslims, and we hear more and more Muslims speaking about the Holy Land and to whom this land belongs. And we invite them to come to Jerusalem and to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and to pray and to get blessings through these prayers like it's written in the Genesis in the Bible. So, dear friends, I want to say thanks, big thanks to all the organized and the partners who came and organized this event. During the event, we will see more and more people will come here, and they will pray, and after pray we will start acting to stop the wars. The idea of this meeting is to start praying for Trump initiative to stop the wars. From the point of view of Israeli side, we can stop the war immediately when our brothers and sisters will back, our hostages will back home. We tried to do it many times during the war, I think 6 or 7 times, even more, and there was many negotiations about to stop the war with our friends from United States. But we see the problem with Hamas. They don't want to stop the war. They want to continue. They want to bring their ideology to genocide Jews as a basic position, a basic ideology of this evil organization. So we try to solve the problem. And of course, the majority of the Jewish population in Israel want to bring our hostages home. And this is, I think, today the main target. Of course, we want to destroy Hamas, but it's a more complicated situation because Hamas is Palestinians. Even in Judea and Samaria, we can see the majority of Hamas supporters, more than 70% of the population in Judea and Samaria, there is no war. They support Hamas ideas to kill Jews. They learn it in the schools, and they try to bring that to all the Muslim brothers in our neighborhood. And we understand that the Muslim brothers, they out of law in Jordan, they out of law in Egypt and many other countries, but we see that this terrorist organization bring more and more power from the people, from regular people, from the population, and they trying to bring the idea of death, of killing people, killing first of all Jews, but we know that in the history, when it starts with Jews, it's never ends with Jews. So they will continue to the hours. So we know about Christians who have big problems in our region, about women. They have big problems. There is no. It's not United States where everybody equal. Women in this world, in our neighborhood, are not equal. So it's a big problem that we have to solve with all our friends here in the Western world. And of course, when we speak about United States, why United States have to be a powerful country, the first policy. Why it have to be a first policy? Because all the friends of United States, all the partners of United States, they need United States very powerful. If United States lose the power of the Western world, all Western world will be failed. And we can be very sure about it. So the idea of first policy of United States, America first policy, is the brilliant idea. We have to support it. I think it's very important for Ukraine, for Israel, for even Arab countries who signed the agreement last week. It's very important because we need strong United States. We need strong position against Iranian nuclear weapons. we need strong positions against what's happening in Ukraine. We have to have a very strong position about China, because we understand that 7th of October is not a Palestinian issue. It's much bigger than that. Hamas don't think about Palestinians. They build human shields, and their idea is to make the biggest damage to Palestinians by this war, to show how Israel is bad. But it's not Israel, it's Hamas. So when we praying, we always ask to act, because the action is not less important than the prayer. But we have to act by the idea about what we are praying. So to stop the war and to start negotiation about the ideas how to bring the peace to the world, it's very important. So I would like to thank to all people who joined us this morning, this early morning, and join the meal and join the ideas that we will speak about that ideas here and pray for these ideas, and we will bring these ideas to action, to do it. So thank you very much to all people who came here to join us and to strong us with these prayers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you for consistency in this work, because Robert, 17 years or how long you organized Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast?
No, we started almost 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
The preparation took 1 year. We started to speak with the President Ruby Rivlin when he was the president, and then I spoke with each member of parliament, almost all the parliamentarians, Jewish parliamentarians, because Arab parliamentarians don't support Christian ideas of Judeo-Christian ideas to return to Israel, that Jews have to return. They thinking that we are came to Israel for a short time, but we was more than 3,000 years there, and we will continue to be in this land, our land, more 3,000 years. So we are continuing with Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, with prayers and with actions. We put many messages on these prayers. For example, we prayed 3 times for Trump elections, and he won. So it's working.
It's working. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I also want to invite for speech Ambassador Oksana Markarova. So it's a person who do very, very hard work to advocate Ukrainian interest, and she is iconic in her ambassador work in so turbulent time. So generally, like working with Ukraine, it's always hard, right? Because Ukraine between Europe and aggressive neighbors, and now on Ambassador Markarova a big mission, and she work really hard, and I think that it's one of the best example of work here in Washington DC, of proactive work. So if we can hear also your position and your values, thank you so much for joining us today for this breakfast. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kateryna. Good morning and God bless you all. Thank you, Robert, for organizing this, and I'm very grateful for Chairman Green, who will join us later, for hosting this, and thank you to all the Reverend Fathers and rabbis and all the friends of both Israel and Ukraine, and of course America, for coming together to pray together. It's very important at times like this, and what a day did we choose. When yesterday President Zelensky just was in Rome and met with Vice President Vance, and it was a very good meeting. And today we all are in anticipation of the phone call between President Trump and, I will not call him president, the war criminal Putin. And we all pray for President Trump to be successful in his mission to bring peace. No one wants peace more than Ukrainians, and we'll all pray and we will do everything possible and sometimes impossible in order to be constructive and in order to help our great friend, the United States, to help us to get to ceasefire and also last and just in peace. Now, as we are praying together with Jerusalem Breakfast, and there are so many similarities if you look at Israel and Ukraine. First, both of our nations are very old nations living at the place which we called our historic homes. And yet both of our nations, for generations, have been denied the right to exist. People and the larger enemies we are defending ourselves from have been for years saying that we don't have the right to exist, using persecutions, using mass deportations, using false information, saying that we should not be there in the first place, or saying that this land is not ours, although everything from the very land to culture to language to everything screams that this is our home. So this is unfortunately sad that even in the 21st century, even with the borders which are internationally recognized, even with everything that tells us that this is our home, that we still have to defend our right to exist and fight for it. Now, another similarity is that through years, both of our nations went through horrible experiences, Holocaust, genocides, and on the territory of Ukraine, as you know, the 80% of the World War II European theater was literally fought on our land, the horrible things that we have experienced. Also, we have to understand that that was the time when Ukraine did not have statehood. So we couldn't defend us and we couldn't defend our Jewish brothers and sisters. That's why horrible things happened. And it's also very important to pray for statehood, because it's only the statehood of Ukraine and statehood of Israel that defends people of Israel and people of Ukraine, of different nationalities, of different religion, of different beliefs. So it's also very important. But it's not only sad similarities that we have between our nations, but also great similarities and inspiring similarities. First, both of our nations fight for this and defend ourselves despite all odds. And we are up against a much larger and bigger enemies. And yet we understand that this is about values, this is about freedom, this is about who we are. And that's why we have to defend ourselves. And I always like to quote a great Israeli prime minister and the great girl from Kyiv, Golda Meir, who said about Israel, but you can equally say it about Ukraine, that in our defense, in our war, we have a secret weapon, which is called no alternative. Because she said Egyptians can run to Egypt, Syrians can run to Syria. The only place we can run to is the sea, so we might as well fight. And this is true about Ukraine. We don't have any other home. This is our home, and we might as well fight, and we will fight. And you see how Ukrainians, like brave and innovative Israelis, are defending their home with everything they have. And innovation and everything else is also something that unites us. But there is the largest similarity that we have, and the one for which we are grateful, is that we have the same friend, and it's United States of America. And I want to use this opportunity to thank America, American people, American president, Congress on a very strong bipartisan basis for this incredible support. We would not be able to be where we are without American support, and Israel would not be able to be where Israel is. And we need this continued support. So while praying for peace, while praying for everything today, we also pray for our American friends to stay the course with us, to be with us, and to get together to just and lasting peace. Now, I want to end by saying that praying have helped us so many times. In the last more than 3 years of this horrible war, more than 1,176 days now of full-fledged aggression, there were so many days when you can only explain what happened to us with the fact that God is helping us. So I always keep remembering Isaiah 41:10. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, that because I am your God, and I will be with you, and I will be upholding you with my right hand. So let's pray, let's fight, let's defend what is dear to us, our land, our loved ones, our values, our freedom, and let's stay close together, because only together the good people can actually defend ourselves from, unfortunately, this new axis of evil with Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others helping them. And we are much stronger than that, and we can be much stronger than that. And I know that together with the US, together with Israel, together with everyone who believes in the same values, we can get to just and lasting peace. Whether it will be difficult or not, whether it will be fast or not, but of course we will play for the fast peace returning to Ukraine, to Israel, and to so many other places where we need it, in order for us Ukrainians, and that's from me, to return to what we like to do the most. We like to grow food, we like to raise children, we like to sing and play and rejoice with everyone else. So God bless you all. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you for coming together for this very special event. And let's be together.
Thank you, Ambassador Margarova. You would remind us also important Jewish concept of bitachon. It's understanding that everything what we have, it's generally will go for good. If you don't understand that, it can happen, but it's all go you for good. And if you're not angry, you find this right way. So in this context, I also want to invite Ambassador Herbst, John Herbst, former American diplomat who was the United States ambassador to Uzbekistan and the United States ambassador to Ukraine. Now he's senior director of Atlantic Council Erosion Center, and his center did and doing a lot of work to support Ukraine. So please also your time to make greetings for us and also to share your ideas how to do this, please.
Thank you. It is a great honor for me to be here. I think the prayer breakfast that you have in Jerusalem, the prayer breakfast you have in Washington, is an important political institution as well as a spiritual venue. I feel not just honored to be here, but I'm glad to be able to talk about the security challenges facing not just the United States, not just Ukraine, not just Israel, but the democratic world which the United States helped to build after the horrors of World War II. And I have a special affection for being here because I served both at the U.S. Embassy in Tel Aviv during what I call the Second Gulf War, the Saddam Hussein Gulf War in the early 90s. And then I served at the U.S. Consulate in Jerusalem in the late 90s, where I had the distinction, if you want to call it that, of being the least important member of the American delegation at the Camp David Summit, the second Camp David Summit, which of course was a failure, sadly. Okay, we face, and again, we, I mean the democratic world, certainly the greatest national security danger since the end of the Cold War, and you could even argue since perhaps the end of World War II. There are 4 countries militarily powerful, although one far less militarily powerful than the other 3, and I'll come to that in a minute, working hard against the interests, first and foremost, of the United States, but also our key allies and partners, and that really today means most importantly Israel and Ukraine. And of course, those 4 countries are China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Now, in Marxist parlance, which still is very, very common in Russia and of course in China and North Korea, there's a phrase of like, who's your principal adversary, your principal foe? And guess what? All 4 of those countries consider the United States to be their principal adversary. Now, Iran, working in the Middle East, doesn't use that sort of Marxist language, so they call us, the United States, the great Satan. But of course, they have nearby the little Satan, meaning Israel. And that's one very quick way to capture the national security danger in the Middle East. A former senior official in the Bush administration, Philip Zelikow, wrote an absolutely brilliant article in the Texas National Security Review last summer, in which he said, among other things, the cooperation of these four countries, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, is greater today than the cooperation amongst the Axis powers, Nazi Germany, Fascist Japan, and Fascist Italy, prior to Pearl Harbor. That's an important observation which has not been fully grasped by policymakers in this town and elsewhere. Now, we've seen very clear examples of their cooperation at the two knife points where the group of four are on the offensive, in Israel and in Ukraine. It's notable, talking about the Middle East, that Hamas showed up in Moscow right after October 7th. We know that without the support that Russia has provided to Iran, and without, obviously, Iran's resources, there would have been no Hamas offensive on October 7th. We know without Iranian resources and cooperation with Russia, which helped Iran develop its missiles and other weapons systems, the Houthis would have not been able both to attack Israel and international shipping. And of course, we know on the flip side of that, Moscow, which has not had a very easy time in Ukraine since its big invasion, has relied on Iranian drones and missiles to pound Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure. So we've seen the activity there. And of course we know that, again, Moscow, whose vast military resources were not sufficient to maintain their barbaric campaign against Ukrainian cities and civilians, would have not gotten as far as it has gotten, or created as much damage as it has created, without North Korean missiles. And of course, as we've seen over the past several months, without North Korean troops. And without Chinese dual technology and economic support, the Russian economy, which is in bad shape, would be in far worse shape. So these guys are all working together against most immediately Ukraine and Israel, but ultimately against us, the United States. And again, this concept has not been fully grasped. The Biden administration provided substantial support to Ukraine, but never enough support to really kick the Russians out of much of Ukrainian territory. The Trump administration wants to achieve not a just peace, a durable peace in Ukraine, which is good enough for government work, although not ideal, but has not pursued that in the energetic and well-informed manner of putting the pressure on the guy who doesn't want that peace. And also, for reasons I don't understand, the Trump administration has decided it no longer has a bone of contention with the Houthis as they continue to slam Israel. That's a problem too. Bottom line. We face, again, an enormous challenge. These four countries are working together. You can be sure if the United States does not stand up to the challenge, that the bad guys can win. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but there are people of influence in this town who don't understand the stakes, whether it's in the Middle East or in Eastern Europe, and they don't understand, and there's at least one high official who's made his misunderstanding very prominent, that were this to happen, the chances of the Chinese moving on Taiwan go up through the ceiling. Which is why, by the way, when this talk came, that the United States only had resources to deal with the Western Pacific, with East Asia, and that forget Ukraine, and in fact, that same official said forget Israel too, although not in such a loud voice. The leaders of Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan all said publicly the best way to deter Chinese aggression is to defeat Putin in Ukraine. Basic geopolitical sense. But that also applies to Israel. When they made that statement, it wasn't clear that there might be some wobbling in the United States as Iran went after Israel. But you notice I said earlier that 3 of these 4 countries were militarily powerful, 1 less so. The 1 less so, of course, is Iran, because of the extraordinary military operations, both brilliant and powerful, that the Israeli government took against Iran, against the advice of the previous administration. With that, I think I've outlined the problem. The answer is clear. Our other speakers spoke to this answer. The United States remains, despite all of its problems, the most powerful nation in the world. We have the resources to deal with the threats in the Western Pacific, in the Middle East, and in Eastern Europe. Now, we can't do that stupidly, the way we conducted the war on terror after 9/11, but we can do it smart. And the best way to do it smart is when you have competent, determined allies and friends. And we've witnessed Ukrainian determination over the past 3 years since the big Russian invasion. In fact, the past 11 years, when Moscow's war in Ukraine began. And we've witnessed Israeli determination, since 1947? With that, I think I've spoken enough. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador Herbst. So, as I know from Mr. Green's office, he will join from 9 till 10. So, if it be possible to start prayer part, firstly with Dubi Holik, our partner, and he also a rabbi with reading Tehillim, will be great. So, and then we will proceed also with Bishop Benjamin. So, Dubi, thank you for joining us, and maybe you can also give some greeting speech and some prayers for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Katya. It's an honor to be here today. Thank you, Robert, and thank you, the ambassadors and all the dignitaries. It's a true honor to be here as an Orthodox Jew, being able to be so influential in being able to forge public policy and build bridges between communities and countries, using commerce as a uniter. What's crucial to be able to have a vehicle other than politics that unites people. I want to give a special shout out to Rose, who came, the trade minister from Bahrain. She was stuck all day in the airport yesterday in Florida, texting me the flights were canceled. She got the 11 o'clock flight. It means a lot to have different diversity over here. Thank you. I just want to share a story that's going on right now as we speak to show you the strength of unity and commerce, how we were able to stand in a place where others couldn't. There was an Orthodox Jew who was murdered 3 weeks ago in Turkey. He was a photographer, and there was a lot of red tape to bring his body back home through the Turkish government that we have close relationships with through commerce. Matter of fact, we introduced the Turkish government with the Pakistani Consul General, and last week I facilitated a signing in the Embassy of Pakistan in New York City, and they publicly thanked the Jewish Chamber of Commerce for making that relationship. Through that relationship, Saturday night, I got a call that this Jewish body from a Jew who was murdered is stuck in Turkey, and there was no way to get him out. Then we had to navigate the State Department to be able to issue the papers, and at the same time work with the Turkish government to release the body, because they kept it, and the family didn't know where it was, and there was investigation, it was a murder. And thank God we facilitated. I called up Christopher Landau. I just spoke to him today in the morning to send them the information that the body arrived last night. The State Department got involved. The Deputy Secretary of State and said, look, it was on a Sunday. I'm going to expedite the paperwork right away. On the Turkish side, we worked with the Turkish government, with the President's office. We worked with the morgues and with the funeral homes, the prosecutor's office. And within a few days, we were able to release that body. And we all know that, from a political perspective, Israel and Turkey, have their internal conflicts. But through our business relationships, we were able to facilitate, and the funeral is going to be 9 o'clock today, being held in Queens. So that was something we accomplished through building bridges, through commerce. And that's a small example of what's going on right now as we speak, of achievements that no one else was able to achieve. And that's what we're here today. Katya, I met her when Zelensky became president, and I flew to Ukraine right away to advocate for the Jewish community. I met Zelensky, and me and Katya worked closely together, and also Uriel, who has the paper, in the Ukrainian big paper, also is here now, settled over here. And we built a network with President Zelensky to fight hate and to arrest those people who were corrupt and really stealing from the Jewish community and blackmailing them. And it was successful, and they made the first arrest in 30 years because of us. So that's a little of what we're sharing over here. Regarding peace, and before I make the prayer, I wanted to explain that there's a scientific approach to really peace, because when you will hear Robert is very familiar with that in Israel and everything, that politicians have their agendas and they'll put the people's interest aside just to push their agenda. And one of the things I want to reflect, what I'm very active in the UN also, is something that we really have to wake up. As we heard, everyone speak about how Ukraine is being pushed to the water. They have to fight. They have no choice. I just chaired the Korean government's expo in Atlanta. I worked closely with Korea. I was in Korea 3 weeks ago, hosted by the government, and at the same time, Korea also, they have the biggest threat on their border, similar to what we have in Israel, that in one day they could come in North Korea and make October 7th on the border. However, and this is something I'm voicing, I have spoken to this to the state of Israel in the highest levels, I'm not going to mention names, the inner frustration of the votes in the UN. If we really align and believe that Ukraine is in the same position, and they put themselves in the same position that they don't have another choice, and they keep on saying we're like Israel, and then we have Korea, who co-sponsored the bill to make a ceasefire during the height of October 7th. I was by the press conference from the Korean government. They asked me to speak because I'm lobbying for them for different things to help them, and we're going to be honoring Thursday. We're hosting World Trade Week on behalf of the United States of America, New York City. We're going to have all the different governments. We're honoring Korean Air. But I used the opportunity to call out the media and say that it's my obligation to speak up and call a spade a spade. We're here to support Korea, but at the same time, if any country should understand the challenges what Israel faces on its border of October 7th, that could happen to them is Korea. How could they go and be a co-sponsor, from the first co-sponsors to call for a ceasefire. But they want someone to do it to them. They understand the danger. And we have the same thing with Ukraine. They understand the challenges. Unfortunately, if you're going to go look at the UN votes, it's really, really, really very, very, very disturbing, because Ukraine and Korea, who are aligning with the threats of Israel and use Israel as an example, vote time and time against Israel. Why? Because of peer pressure. So we have to call out this peer pressure, and we have to align. When we align our goals, we will be successful. I just put an op-ed out yesterday in the Israel National News, Naot Sheva, and I wrote concerns about what's going on now with Donald Trump. The president went to Arab nations, to the Gulf, and God willing, he should be successful in building a network. But Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all the countries he went to unite, all those countries harbored terrorism, support Hamas. At the same time, Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11. And to be able to build a network that could turn into a monster if once we empower them and have America rely on their financial stability, their finances, puts us in a very uneasy position. Meaning to say that, let's say, God forbid, the next administration is not as strong as Trump, and they don't have the language like we've seen before in the Biden administration and the relationship. They'll say, you know what, we're going to go side with China and Russia now. And we just built an animal of a monster of countries who didn't get along in the Gulf, united them, dependent on them, then they have no human rights. They have zero human rights with the values of the West, and we have no leverage over them. We are creating another UN that we created when Israel was established to protect Israel. That's the number one enemy for the state of Israel. This could be the number one enemy for America and for the Western world. So in my op-ed, I said everything's beautiful and nice, but does the United States have an exit strategy if this group that we built turns into a monster and they control us financially and they gather together as united when we build them and empower them to be able to take the ears out of the tires? And I sent that message to the people all the way on the top of the administration, and I said, our community, the Jewish community, and the Western community, were concerned about what the exit strategy is, because we don't want to build another monster that's going to hurt us. So I applaud the president and I bless him for what he's doing, but at the same time, we have to have a plan B. And it hasn't worked in the past. The UN is a monster. The International Criminal Court is a monster. They come against the Western values. They come against Israel. They come against everything. And we are creating right now, the president built a network, but I'm very afraid of really where it's going to go, because we don't know who's going to be sitting tomorrow in the chair. And Donald Trump has a unique personality where people do feel like intimidated from, but it's very unusual for anyone to get up as strong as him. So having said that, I wanted to point out that peace has a lot to do with psychology. It has a lot to do with us keeping our grounds, staying grounded, not getting excited from a plane from Qatar. What I don't think anyone agrees. As much as we love Donald Trump and we're here and we support him, yeah, I would also be excited. It's very flashy, it is exciting. I'm not going to deny that it's tempting. But at the same time, that is the number one bribery. And it's something that we have to draw a line, and we have to create an outline. And I heard my close friend Mark Levin speak yesterday on Fox News, and he said we have to create guidelines right now of where we're going with this process, because right now we embrace, those groups and empowering those who support terror and Hamas and Iran in the world. So it's very concerning looking at the future of how we're trying to embrace and build peace, because is it just on hope that it's going to work? I can tell you right now that when one of those countries where Trump was now, who signed the paper, is the paper's not worth the ink they signed on. And we all know it. And they could go tomorrow and stand with Russia and China and Iran, and we're going to be in cahoots, as our friend over here, Ambassador, said, that as it is their alliance with North Korea and Iran is so scary. Imagine if we give them all the Muslim and the countries who don't have human rights values, and it's very scary. So we have to really pray for peace, and we have to pray also, in Yiddish they say for seichel. Seichel is common sense. Common sense means that when we advocate to our politicians, we have to demand an exit strategy. When they go to vote in the UN, including Ukraine, yes, the Israeli government, we demand that if you're comparing yourselves to us, we are very hurt when you vote against us. Yes, same thing for Korea. And when I brought it up to Korea, and I don't know if you watched on TV, but you saw the next time there was a vote in the UN, the Korean ambassador started crying about October 7th victims after I brought it to their attention. And it's just communication. So we have to stand strong, we have to focus, and that's the way we'll be able to build a healthier future. And I urge everyone in this room to go to our politicians and ask them, what is the administration's exit strategy? Because we positioned ourselves now for the future in a very dangerous position, even though we have the best hopes. Look, yesterday in the news, the vice president was supposed to go to Israel. It was all over the news. Today he was canceled because he's afraid of Hamas. Who's pushing the buttons? All over the news. The vice president of Israel was supposed to go to Israel. How many times are you going to humiliate Israel that Trump was supposed to come in the meeting and he didn't go? Then you have the vice president's going to go, and because of Hamas, he didn't go. Anyhow, I'm going to finish with this. I'm happy to say that we're here, and Kat could tell you, and Robert could tell you, we're all about action. I'm going to be leading a mission, the first mission, the most powerful mission ever in the history of the State of Israel, of media influencers to be able to create and share the story. My partner is Chris Rudy, Newsmax. June 29th to October 3rd, we're going to have a mission of the top 70 biggest radio TV influencers ever, Christians, and I'm leading it. I got the State of Israel to sponsor it, and they're very excited. And we are going to even had my close friend Mike Huckabee push off the embassy party to the next week, the comedy that's for this week, who's going to be with us by the event. So each person coming to this delegation is going to be receiving an invitation from the State of Israel as a guest. And the first thing is awareness, because without awareness, you don't understand that Israel is smaller than New Jersey. Ukraine is much bigger. North Korea is much bigger. We have nowhere to go over there. I was on the phone yesterday, 2 days ago, with the foreign minister of the State of Israel, who was in the middle of preparing the mission. And he says, Duvi, his chief of staff says, Duvi, 10 minutes, I'll call you back, because we had to run in Israel, the foreign ministry, we had to run into the bunker because the Houthis were sending missiles. And this is from the Knesset. So there's nowhere to hide. So again, peace, yes. Approaches for peace, yes. But we have to work together. We can't just say we support, we're like Israel, but at the same time vote against them in the UN and call for them and to call for them to have a ceasefire when they don't have where to go. And we all know what Hamas says, what they can do again and again. So if God didn't protect us, no one protects us. And I'm going to finish with this. In the history of the world, no one could show that we had hundreds of ballistic missiles sent to us from Iran without one Jewish casualty and not one getting through. The Americans failed by 75%. Google it. 75%. All the big shot missiles didn't work to intercept. Okay? It was God who protects the State of Israel. And we have to pray over here that God should protect us and God should guide President Trump. It says that God, Leiv Melachim b'yad Hashem, the hearts of the kings on the hands of God. We have to pray that God gives the right thoughts and the right judgment to our president and be able to help guide us, because we all know his heart's in the right place, but he's not going to live forever, and we don't know who's going to take over. And the UN is a perfect example of where things could go south. And today, with technology and with the world and with all these things going on, any part of the world, India and Pakistan, right? Thursday, I'm hosting an event in Washington in World Trade. I'm going to have India and Pakistan in the same room, and we work together. I don't know if anyone else could tell you that. We're going to have Turkey and Israel in the same room on Thursday in New York City. And you know what? I'm proud of it, because we all use commerce and we don't focus on politics. We bring them together. So my ask before I say the prayer is that we should be able to, God should open our minds and make us be realistic and be able to be self-independent and own up to what we say and do the right votes in the UN, because right now the UN is the number one instigator for, literally, they supported October 7th. Their facilities were used for October 7th. They hide the Hezbollah behind them. They hide Hamas behind them. They use their bags. They use their buildings. And no one says anything, and never happened. So Israel really has nowhere to go. Commerce is a uniter. We're able to focus. We have something that we can work on to build bridges and bring people together. And with that, I'm going to say my prayer. And of course, yesterday was a beautiful thing. We saw the whole United States unite. Unfortunately, the previous president, Biden, was diagnosed with cancer. And we saw the country come together, unfortunately, for a bad cause that we're all concerned about, because we all care about our leaders. And that President Trump, the Speaker of the House, Democrats, Republicans, all stood up, and we're all praying for Biden's, health. And it was beautiful to see how people could unite, and that's what we need today. We need to stop putting our political interests first and focus on the people's needs. It says, "Gam ki elech b'geit salmoves lo yirara ki ata imodi." That says in Psalms. Even when I go in the shadow of death, lo yirara, nothing bad is going to happen to me, ki ata imodi, because the Creator is with me. So I'm going to say one prayer and hope that we all are able to be protected when we go in the shadow of death, and we're able to know that God's protecting us, but we're going to do ours to be able to be in touch. Shir lama alois esoinai el hehorim me'ayin yovoi ezri me'im adinoi oisei shomayim v'oretz al yitein lamoit raglecha al yonum shemrecha hinei lo yonum v'lo yishon shomei Yisrael adinoi shemrecha adinoi tzilcha al yad yimenecha yomam hashemesh lo yakeka v'yoreach balayla adinoi yishmorcha mikol ra yishmor es nafshecha adinoi yishmor tzeischa uveyecha me'ata v'ad olam. Thank you.
So now I want to invite Apostle Leon Benjamin, senior pastor in New Life Harvest Church and chief apostle and presiding prelate in New Life Har. So please also your welcome speech and also your part of prayers. Thank you so much.
Greetings everyone, and God bless everyone here today. It's a pleasure to be here. Chairman Robert and Kateryna and Ambassador, all the distinguished guests and speakers, pastors and leaders. This is a wonderful opportunity to see unity, the real true unity that we need that goes beyond our differences. I am Bishop Leon Benjamin, Apostle and Chief Prelate of the New Life Harvest Church and also the World Federation Council of Churches. Our apostolic network, we strive to endeavor to spread the word of God and the gospel of Yeshua and our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. to all nations, according to Matthew 28:19. As we're praying today in this wonderful prayer breakfast, I believe that we can seek God for solutions to peace. As mentioned in scripture, I was asking the Lord to give me something that we can take from here and chew on it and meditate on it and digest it in our own framework and our own understanding, because that's what the Bible says. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not to thy own understanding, but acknowledge him in all thy ways, and he shall direct your path. Deuteronomy 28, before we pray, 28:1, it talks about the assembling the congregation of Israel after coming out of the exodus of Egypt, God now molding and making his nation a kingdom of priests, a royal priesthood, a called out nation. The word is ek, and we get the word ecclesia, called out, assembly, the church of the Old Testament. And being called out, he brings them to this place where they now have to receive the law again, because Moses throws the 10 Commandments down in frustration. You know, what happens to sometimes us as leaders in frustration, we think that throwing the law at people in anger can get them to do the law. And God says, no, you're going to have to come right back up here on Mount Sinai and get that law again. Deuteronomy means the law of the second time. So he gets it again, brings them to this assembly and says, it shall come to pass, and the Lord gives him this, if thou shalt hearken diligently unto the voice of the Lord. Truly, the word of God is the law of God. It comes forth out of the mouth of God. And though they were traveling around in the wilderness for 40 years, he so eloquently lets them know that man should not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeded forth out of the mouth of God. So in giving them that, he reminds them that hearing the voice of God allows a road to peace. The word peace, the word is shalom. In the Greek is irene. It means nothing missing, nothing broken. It means prosperity. So peace is not something you endeavor to seek after. It is a residual of listening to God. So watch out for people who say we're going to get peace and they're not listening to God. You don't seek prosperity. Prosperity is a residual of being in a kingdom. And so he tells them all of these commandments to observe and to do all his commandments, which I command thee this day, that the Lord thy God will set thee on high above all nations of the earth. So it is God that sets us up. It is God that places us up on high, not to make other nations mad or envious, but to let them know that if you do it a certain way, I'll do it to you too. God is not a respecter of persons. God is not he's a respecter of principle. And he says, I'll set you, Israel, on high above all nations, not to be braggadocious but to cause or provoke one to jealousy. Why are you so high? And then the Israelite would say, because we hearkened unto the voice of the Lord. In doing so, they will become an ensign and a beacon of light to all nations who do not know who God is for themselves, who do not know who Jehovah is, who do not know who the true and living God is, Elohim, creator of all things. And so he tells them this word blessings, the word is barakah or baraka. He says the blessings will happen and it shall come on thee and overtake thee if thou shalt hearken. So still, he says, don't seek the blessings, hear my voice. And these barakas shall come on you. It will overtake you, will chase you down. It's like when we leave here, how would you like $10 million to be coming in your bank account as soon as you leave here because you heard the voice of God? The blessings will look for you instead of you looking for the blessings. The blessings will chase you down. It's sort of like when you do what is right, don't expect bad. When you do what is right, always expect good. That's baraka. And then he tells them that all these blessings, so blessed, the word is barak. He says, blessed shall thou be in the city. This is a road to peace, a road to peace, a road. This is the road less traveled sometimes because we listen sometimes to our own consciousness or to our own frustration or to our own stereotypes, our own idiosyncrasies. We listen sometimes to wrong voices and we wonder why we don't get peace. Because we're listening to the wrong people or the wrong circumstances. But he says, blessed shall thou be in the city. This is a road. Blessed shall thou be in the field. They're roads. They're roads. They're roads to peace. When you on the right road, you'll get to where you're going to get to with blessings. It says, blessed shall thou be in the fruit of thy body. So that means in inner sanctum, sanctuary, this being a consecrated nation, set apart. We get the word sanctified, hagios in the Greek, set apart. You shall be a set apart nation. You shall be blessed not only in the outside, you'll be blessed on the inside. You'll cherish what you produce, the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your ideas, the fruit of all you do is because you're on the road that I set you on. You know, it took 40 years, but really the travel was only supposed to be a couple of days. 40 years, 11-day, how does an 11-day trip turn into 40 years? It's because all these voices are bombarding us and trying to tell us how to get to peace, how to get to the promised land, how to get to Canaan, how to get a happy marriage or a blessed home or a blessed business. And we take these roads sometimes that lead to detours and lead to catastrophe and lead to deprivation and lead to tragedy and lead to frustration. We take these roads and we're wondering, then we try to bring other, now think about this. If the blind lead the blind, they both fall in the ditch. So here you're now trying to get a person on a road that you don't know where you're going. So now you have leadership. And this is the thing about faith and policy. When we have Congress and politicians who are supposed to be leading us on the road to peace, and they don't know what peace is. They have no idea what faith and policy coming together, what that really means for a nation. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. And so he says you're blessed in all this, the basket and the store. So your Walmarts will be blessed. Your home-based businesses will be blessed. Your storehouses, your bank accounts, your treasury, all of those things will be blessed if you travel this road, if you take this road. Now, on this road, did they have to come against enemies? Yes. They had to come against their own cousins, the Edomites. Those were Esau's descendants. They had to come against their own, Gog and Magog. They had to come against other nations, Sion. Even before they crossed into the promised land, they had to battle. Moses lifts up his hands, they win. Moses' hands goes down, they lose. So Aaron and Hur get up under Moses' hands. And so Joshua doesn't even know that he's prevailing because Moses' hands are being lifted up. That's what we have to pray for our leaders, that we have the right people undergirding our leaders so that when their hands lifted up, come on, pray for President Trump. Pray for him that he has the right people lifting up his hands. Pray for Benjamin Netanyahu. Pray for the Chairman Robert. Who's lifting up your hands? Think about that. You might have to fire some people this week because how come you're so tired? You have the wrong staff. You have the wrong people lifting up your hands. You want to get the right millennials. Come on, the right Gen Zs. You got to get the right people to lift up your hands. But understand this as I pray. I'm going to pray because Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 5, and we're talking about peace. Are y'all okay? Matthew chapter 5, verse number 9. Look what it says here, the road to peace. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. That means the highest God. This word here is talking about the highest God, the highest God. It means theos. We get the word theos. So what is your theology when you study God? Do you consecrate yourself to the highest God, or do you depend on little gods? Your peace then is then limited to the God you worship. If you worship the biggest God, you get the biggest peace. You worship little gods, you may not get any peace. So you have to know, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called not the adults of God, the children of God. Why children? Because children say they want to please. They innocently jump in. They go, okay, we'll do it. A child, like Jesus said, blessed is these children, for they are the kingdom of God. It's that childlike faith that nations need in order to lead a people who are not sure if this can be attained. We need leadership who still understand that childlike understanding of that God still, as old as we are. Who's the oldest person in here? Anybody in here 102? Okay. Even at 102, God still calls you a child. At 102, you're still a child. How old is God? Right? He's eternal. No age. So as I pray today, this road to peace, that we will become a people, regardless of our nationalities, our cultures. I happen to be a black man, but I'm not a black leader. I'm just a black man who happens to be a leader. My descendants come from the Congo, but it's funny. The Congo ends up in Ireland, and the Ireland ends up in North Carolina, and my mother is Jamaican. I ain't trying to figure all that out. I just want to be what God called me to be. And in the road to peace, you have to challenge yourself. Are you taking the right steps? The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delighteth in his way. The translation is that man plans his ways, but it's the Lord's plans that will ultimately prevail. So God is going to protect Israel. I heard you, Duvie. Well, Duvie's gone now, but God ultimately is responsible for Israel. And we are to be jealous of that. Zechariah talks about it. He shall be a wall of fire around them, a city without walls. It'll be like a city without walls. They didn't say it wouldn't have walls. It'd just be like one, because so much is encompassed in the borders of that city. Much cattle, much industry, much business. That's what's happening with America right now. It's coming back where the borders now protect the industries. The borders now protect education. The borders now protect children. The borders protect families. That's what we want, not only in Israel, but we want it in every country. We want it in Ukraine, where the borders protect what's inside of the city, like a wall of fire. You ever try to put your hand through fire? You bold Marines or wherever you are. I served in the United States Navy. I was in the Gulf Wars during the first Saddam Hussein, whoever talked about that. I was on a ship called the John F. Kennedy. I remember that war, protecting Kuwait and other cities who could not protect themselves. And so let's pray for this road. Let's pray that we all can come up under God and submit ourselves under God and find this road so that we, as we walk on this road, others will follow. Notice, if you're blind and blind people follow you, no one's going to ask the question, because they say they both fall into a ditch. So I pray for sight here, spiritual sight. I pray for spiritual sight. Also, I pray for our social, emotional sight, our physical and our financial sight. I pray that God will barak us. I pray for the barakah. That's so that I don't have to chase down the blessings. Just like our Lord said, these signs shall follow them that believe. I want the blessings to overtake Israel and Ukraine so that they wake up tomorrow morning and we hear of a peace treaty, that the war is over. Anybody here with me about that? That would wake up in the morning and Israel and Jerusalem, and there's no more Hamas, come on, chasing them down, but the blessings are chasing them down. Anybody here with me want that? Come on, it doesn't have to take all month, all year. It can happen in 24 hours, because that's how the blessings happen. That's how the barakah happens. It chases you down. It overwhelms you. And you're going, I could have had a V8. I could have had this yesterday. All I had to do was listen to the voice of God. So, Father, we thank you for the voice of God in our lives through your word, through your spirit, through your wisdom, that you will grant us this type of shalom, that we will not have to pursue it, that this barakah will pursue us because we heard your voice. Help us to stay on that road in America. Help us to stay on that road around the country, around the world. Help us to stay on that road so that we can all come together regardless of culture, regardless of race, regardless of nationality, that we can all be on that road to peace. We thank you, Lord. Stop the wars. Pray for President Trump that he will be a peacemaker. We pray for Israel. They will be peacemakers. Ukraine, peacemakers. Russia, peacemakers. We pray for these countries, China, peacemakers. Lord, let us not be ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It is the power of God unto salvation. And we thank you, Lord, today that you will have your way in this room, that we walk out of here together, united and enjoined in the same mission, the mission of peace. We thank you. Amen. God bless you all.
Thank you. It's hard to be a speaker after so great speech, and we also welcome Congressman Mark Green, friend of Robert, and also a big supporter of idea of prayer breakfast. So he represents Congressional District number 7 from Tennessee. Of course, he is member of Republican Party, and he also chairman of Committee of Homeland Security. So thank you so much for joining us and for supporting our aim. So if you can tell us also about your motivation and maybe some prayers,
Sure.
will be great.
Well, first, let me thank you all for being interested in this, being here today. We have a lot of violence going on our planet right now, whether it's what's happening in the Middle East or in Europe or in Chicago. This notion that people take matters into their own hands and make really bad decisions has really, dividing up has really been with us ever since the very beginning. I think it was the first row cropper who killed the first herdsman because he just wasn't like him, or jealousy or something. And when Cain took Abel's life, we've been dividing up ever since. And that tribalism has been around since then. And it's interesting, if you read the book of John, Christ is in the Garden of Gethsemane about to go and die. He knows his future. He knows what's about to happen. He asks that it doesn't happen. He says, hey, take this cup from me. But he knows the will of the Father, and so he does the will of the Father. But before he goes to make that happen, in John 17, he says a prayer. So you got to figure, this is a pretty powerful or important prayer. The last one he makes before he gives his life. He prays that they, all of us, people of faith, would be unified. Because through unity, the reality of who God is presented to the world. And the enemy, to God, knows that too. And he goes all the way back to the very beginning and does what he had started the whole thing with, and that is disunity, dividing, splitting, pulling us apart. And that is the first step toward that violence. There's a passage in Romans where Paul is talking. He talks about how we step slowly away from God to a point where, and at each step, God kind of steps back too. And ultimately, it turns into a depraved mind where there's no concept of right or wrong. And that step begins with you looking at a brother and saying, I don't want to be connected. I don't want to be united. I want to be different. And the path back to fixing it all is really just two people. All we got to do. And you look at the division in our country between parties, between groups. I mean, the cheerleaders or the band guys and the football guys, the jocks versus they sit and nobody bridges the gap, you know. Politically in the discourse, Republicans, Democrats, one of the things I did when I first got to Congress was I formed a club. I called it the Reagan-O'Neill Club. Now, Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, they fought like cats and dogs during the daytime, but at night, once a week, they scheduled an opportunity to go and have a little brown water, as they say in Tennessee, where I'm from. They had some Irish whiskey, and they sat and they just talked about something other than politics. And they had a relationship that allowed them to get things done for the country, and a lot of good things happened then. Well, the Reagan-O'Neill Club that I started, we had 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans. I wouldn't let them talk policy. I wouldn't let them talk anything that divides. You could only ask about the other person's story. So where does this all begin? It just begins with starting to have a relationship with someone who thinks or views the world differently than you. Perhaps they're a row cropper and you're a herdsman. And you just ask somebody, tell me your story. And this is on the individual level. On the leadership level, we can see examples of where it doesn't work. You go to the Middle East and you tell a nation, we're not going to continue our relationship with you, and we're going to make friends with another nation, and an imbalance occurs, and one country becomes more powerful than another. You get what happened in October a few years ago. The goal is unity, because unity begets peace. Peace with each other, and of course peace with the God who created all of us. And all it takes is someone willing to ask somebody else, tell me your story. And if we're all willing to do that, and leaders are willing to do that, well then we can get to peace. And put some of our judgments and opinions aside for just a moment and connect with another person on a human level. We all got kids, and everybody wants the same thing for their kids. Peace. And Christ had it right. The issue is division, and that division has been the tool of the enemy since the beginning of time. So if you sense yourself clinging to something that might divide, you might ask yourself, do I need to really have that thought in my mind? Because that thought that divides just might lead to bad choices. Might mean you don't greet someone a certain way on a street. Could mean anything, really. Unity is at the heart of peace. You don't have peace until you have a mentality of unity, and you don't have unity if you don't act on it. But I'm kind of preaching to the choir because you're here. You're here. And so if we just have to talk about it. And that's why breakfasts like this are so important. We can have a dialogue about peace, about unity, about what that looks like every day you go to work. This notion that we form stereotypes is very human. It is very human to do that. It's also very divisive. Just because I meet 9 people from Mars that like strawberry milkshakes doesn't mean the 10th Martian I meet is going to like strawberry milkshakes. Regardless of the statistics. And if we think that way, it'll shape how we behave, and that's not good. That doesn't create unity. That creates division. And so avoiding those stereotypes, avoiding even your own experiential evidence that you collect as you walk through life every day, blocks that divisive component that is in our flesh and can lead to something very beautiful happening. I think our goal should be, as Christ said, and that is that we be unified so that the world knows who God is. And by doing so, we get peace. So there's a little message from Congress. Actually, it's from the Word. But I am Mark Green, and I am the chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security. It is my responsibility to look at the threats to the nation, to the United States, and to our people. And because of how mankind is and that fallen nature and all those things, there are people who act on their own self-interests above others. And because of stereotypes and division and all of this stuff, it necessitates us to protect ourselves. We protect ourselves with friends aligning, and we do our very best to deter any expression of disunity or selfishness or whatever, however you want to look at it, evil, so that step away from God leads to depravity. And we do that through strength. And deterrence occurs by two things, and it is the product, not the sum of those two things. It is the product of willpower and capability. And nations and friends and alliances that have a capability but no willpower will have zero deterrence. And we saw that in Ukraine. All the capability in the world, the super might of the West couldn't deter because a bad guy didn't think we had the will. Well, I think the West has shown a will, and we're at a unique place in this particular struggle. And that is a place where people are attempting to bring peace and bring people together. And it means potentially sitting down with people that maybe we have some ill will toward because of things they've done. But if we want peace, we're going to have to do that. And we do want peace. And it's the same in the Middle East. And so now we sit with capability and will and a leader who will go and meet with anyone to see peace happen, but who also will meet difficulty with resolve. With resolve. And that creates the willpower, it communicates the will to do what's necessary, matched with the capability, and you can get deterrence that way. We just need to support those kinds of leaders who are willing to do that. And that brings peace. So, on our own individual level, there's work to be done. And leaders that are willing to do the right thing for us, there's work to be done in supporting them. And since God picks our leaders for us, that's another reason to support them. And I think you guys know what I'm talking about. It's, again, an honor to be here. And I would like to just say a quick prayer, since this is a prayer breakfast. So, if you'll bow with me. God, Father in heaven, we come before you in humility, accepting our own faults and our own tendency as human beings to act in our own self-interest, and we confess that to you. We also recognize you've asked us to rise above that and to see the person sitting across from us as a brother or a sister, as a creation of your holy hand. And we ask, God, that you give us the strength to overcome those natural tendencies of disunity and to be unified. Help us to figure out how to communicate this to others. The forces we're fighting against are spiritual. That this is a part of the painting you started in a garden long ago. And as it unfolds, it requires each one of us to act outside of our own self-interests and in the interests of the whole and in your command to be unified. And through that unity, the world will know who you are. And that ultimately is the mission of why you created us all, your own glory. God, we ask that the rest of this day will equip us with the right things to say, the right things to do, the right leaders to support, the right efforts to be a part of in the quest for unity and the peace that comes from it. And I just pray for an incredible, uplifting day, a day that everyone here leaves informed and motivated, passionate about what is on your heart, God, which is that your people would choose you, would choose the higher things above self, above sin, above flesh. And I ask this in your Son, Jesus' name, as I pray in my faith tradition. Amen.
Thank you so much. Robert, please, your speech, and we have special present from our team also for Capitol Hill Club
Sure.
today. Yeah.
Sure.
Congressman Mark Green, I came to your office several weeks ago, and I said what we have to pray for the peace and prosperity in Israel and Ukraine. It taken less than 1 minute to take a decision to lead this event here, and I would like to thank you for that.
Yeah.
You don't know how people around the world looking for the peace. Millions of kids in Israel, in Ukraine, even in Palestine, in Gaza.
Sure.
The kids, Arab kids, they are hostages of Hamas, and we want to help them. So this call from the Congress, from the Israeli Parliament, from the Parliament of Ukraine, we have here Ambassador of Ukraine. We want to say thank you that
Sure.
you took that case and go with us. And the Ambassador has said that we have spiritual institute here. So we established Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast Spirit Institute, and we established this prayer breakfast as a spiritual institute. It's a very interesting, spiritual, and deep understanding of what's happening around the world. So I want to say a special thanks to you that you join us and start leading with us this special event. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we also take tradition from prayer breakfast, which was in Mar-a-Lago in like Trump's home. It's to present mezuzah to the place where we generally organize breakfast. Today we invite Cindy, who leads this club and do all hard work, and Uriel Stern to present this mezuzah. It's all Jewish tradition. And maybe Uriel can tell a little bit more, because this mezuzah made from Ukrainian amber, like in old Jewish tradition. So Cindy, if you, Uriel will explain what is mezuzah, and we want to present this mezuzah to the club to make club a safe place for people who have wisdom to bring peace. Please explain a little bit.
What is the main concept that Jews bring to the world? The concept of freedom. As the famous artist Marcel Marceau, a member of the French resistance who saved thousands of Jewish children in France from death, said, "Why do dictators hate the Jews? So much because the Jews were slaves and they become free. There is nothing more terrible for dictators than slaves who become free. Freedom is the most important concept in Judaism. Because without freedom, you cannot believe who you want. You cannot tell the truth and teach the children that is necessary, and they cannot even speak our language. If you are a slave, you cannot do nothing. Today, the countries in the world are fighting for the free and to be free, to live on our land, to speak our language, to serve the God, Israel and Ukraine. And why we are here in unity before this capital of the free world, praying for the victory, the basic the value, the freedom. Is the right in our sage in the time before the coming the Messiah. Shem, symbol of Jews, will enter the tent of the Yafet, the people of Ukraine, as is written in the tale of the Begone Tales. Begone years, tales of the begone years. Spiritually will turn in the physical beauty. This is what the mezuzah symbolizes, symbol of the Jewish people and the beauty of the master of Ukraine and Ukrainian amber, and the president of PolitA club.
Please show us. It's really beautiful. So thank you, Cindy, so much for hosting us. Thank you for your work. Thank you so much. Thank you. So, Peter Husi, our first speaker, is Senior Fellow of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies, think tanks who provide deterrence education, national security analysis, and policy solutions. And he also president of Geostrategic Analysis. He also did before a lot of work for Hudson Institute and for other think tanks. So also here in the panel we have John Herbst, who will stay with us, former American diplomat who was United States Ambassador to Uzbekistan and United States Ambassador to Ukraine, Senior Director of Atlantic Council Eurasia Center, Adam Schindler, Chief Digital Officer of America First Institute, First Policy Institute think tank. He also very involved to Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, and he was co-organizer of that in Jerusalem, Dallas, and San Antonio, Texas. So let's start our first panel discussion and a general overview of situation. And I will explain also how I involved to Ukraine. So generally, my father was elected from southern Ukraine several times, and after when war starts, he was in Russian sanction list, he was in Russian killing list. They took our property because it's technically their nationalization. So, and my work is generally political communication work. So that's why we start deep analysis work from Institute to Democracy and Development to really make impact and, to work here in Washington, D.C. and in Brussels to push some solutions, some direct constructive solutions. So this first panel will be about solutions. And I will ask firstly Peter to do general overview of situation in Middle East and Ukraine also. And also I will ask everybody to find some similarities and some differences in this conflict. And also it will be first row of our discussion. And second row, it will be your generally proposals and solutions for Middle East and for Ukraine. Of course, it's not possible to do in 3 minutes, but we ask be in time and not more than 5 minutes in first answer and 3 minutes in second answer to jump to second panel about humanitarian. So Peter, please, your overview about situation.
Thank you very much, Kateryna. I'm Peter Husi. I'm Senior Fellow at the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. And I want to talk to you about something that I've titled The Role of Religious Faith and Moral Clarity in Taking Down the Soviet Union and Winning the Cold War. The reason I say that is if you go to the Victims of Communism Memorial here in Washington, D.C., go on their website. They did a conference just a couple of years ago on exactly this subject. And you have to understand, Tony Dolan was the chief speechwriter for Reagan, and he gives a fabulous hour-long discussion of religious faith and moral clarity and what role that played in the takedown of the Soviet Union. I want to go back when I was an intern here in Washington, D.C., in the White House, and then before that I was in the Senate as an intern in the early 1970s during détente and peaceful coexistence. Number one, we had, under the rubric of containment, talked about dealing with the Soviet Union. Well, the first test of that was Korea. And do you know who opposed sending American soldiers to Korea? George Kennan, supposedly the author of Containment. In the 1970s, if you just do the numbers, starting with Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and ending with Afghanistan, 18 countries flipped from pro-American to pro-Soviet. 18 during the period of détente and peaceful coexistence. Détente and peaceful coexistence basically fudged the issue of, can a democratic constitutional republic of America, leading the free world, get along with a totalitarian tyranny, the Soviet Union? I remember in this very room, Max Kampelman, who was Hubert Humphrey's lawyer and was a negotiator on behalf of the United States under Ronald Reagan for SDI. He gave a speech here about exactly this issue. He said, can you deal with a country that takes people they disagree with politically and puts them in psychiatric hospitals? Is that not the definition of evil? And the reason he said that is that that was a month after Ronald Reagan's speech before the evangelicals, where he described the Soviet Union as an evil empire. Now, that same month, he did two other things. Is the MX missile was approved by the Scowcroft Commission, for which you can find me guilty, because that's how I started my seminar series here at the club, and I've been doing it for 40 some odd years. And the other thing he did was he announced SDI. Well, if you're sitting in the Kremlin and you see all those three things, and he did a fourth thing. He sat down with the Pope John, and agreed to send $8 million a year to Solidarity. Now, Solidarity, as you know, was the British labor union, the Polish labor union. And there's a interesting thing here is in 1683, on September 11th, was the high water mark of the Muslim conquest of Europe. And that's where it stopped, which is why they attacked us on September 11th. So what was Reagan's alternative? It was moral clarity based on telling the world who the Soviets were and what their empire was about, whether it was Nicaragua or Cuba, or whether Vietnam or North Korea or Syria. Remember, the Soviet Union was the largest state sponsor of terror in the world. Now, Iran now has that, but Iran just is doing the dirty work for China, and as the ambassador pointed out. So what did Reagan say? We're not going to do containment. We're not going to do détente and peaceful coexistence. We're going to roll back. Now, for those of you who want to know how we did this, Reagan himself said, we made economic war on the Soviet Union. There is a publication, it's called the National Intelligencer. It's by Myron Norquist. His son is Grover Norquist, who you know from American Tax Reform. This paper was written in 2001. It's How the United States Won the Cold War by Warren Norquist. It's the most detailed explanation, and I'll give it to you in a summary. Russia's foreign exchange in 1980 was $30 billion. That is what they used to run their empire. By 1989, we had either taken away from Russia or made them have to pay $89 billion to run their empire. They couldn't do it. Gorbachev tried, he arrested 850,000 black market people in the Soviet in Russia, because that was anathema to the communists, because it wasn't a planned economy, it was underground. And not only that, he took 280,000 party members and had them arrested because they were not following the way they were actually part of the underground economy. So we completely misinterpreted what Russia was about. We thought détente and peaceful coexistence. And for example, all of Eastern Europe was getting bank loans from Western banks. And when they couldn't pay the bank loans or the interest, guess what? The banks would redo the loans, include all the interest, and stick our banks with the bill if the Eastern Europeans didn't. One of the first things Roger Robinson did on the National Security Council under Reagan is he said, you went to the banks and said, no more loans to Eastern Europe. We all of a sudden cost Russia $6 billion a year in interest. And then he decontrolled oil prices. And what happened then? The price of oil got the Saudis to increase oil production by 10 million barrels a day. Oil went from around $32 a barrel down to 12. And it not only boomed our economy, but took billions of dollars out of the Soviet exchequer. So when you look at security policy in Ukraine, or you look at security policy in Israel, and it's interesting, I'm connected to all these things, kind of interesting. My grandfather, sometime back in the 18th century, his relatives came to Poland from Israel. And in 1969 and 70, I studied in South Korea at Yonsei University. So they're like brothers and sisters to me. I was in what's called the International Division. There were three of us, two girls and myself. We were all from three different schools. And the other thing is I taught at the National Defense University in Ukraine and in Vilnius at the invitation of their embassy people here that used to attend my seminars. So I'm kind of connected to all of these things. And if moral clarity with respect to Korea is very simple, what did President Trump say to the National Assembly in Seoul in his first administration? That's all you need to know about who we're dealing with. There is no détente and peaceful coexistence with North Korea. Okay, with respect to Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, this fairy tale, and I have to tell you, Bill Clinton said it when he said, if we just give the Palestinian state, all this terrorism goes away. But as the ambassador told us, Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Iran, they don't care about the Palestinians. They use them, and they've been using them ever since Arafat and company were created by the USSR. But what they do is they use them as a lever to get a lot of money, but then they use that money to commit terrorism against Israel and the United States. Remember, they attacked, 32 separate entities in the Middle East that were U.S. interests about 2 years ago. So I know we're short of time, but what I want to just make a point is if you're going to do security policy on Ukraine, there is no doubt who the aggressor was, and that's Russia. There is no doubt who the thug is, Mr. Putin. The thing is, does Ukraine have the ability to kick Russia out of the whole country? Tragically, I don't think so. On the other hand, I don't think Russia has the ability to take over the country. So do we do a Finland post-World War II deal where it's ugly as bad and I don't like it, but we may have to settle for less than what we would like to settle for? On the other hand, Israel and the United States have taken down Hamas and Hezbollah very brilliantly. We can take Iran's money and their oil away from them, which we should, and put them on the ropes, where they were over 4 years ago with Donald Trump's first term. I think if you're going to be successful in my business, which is security policy, you have to have moral clarity as to what you're dealing with. Otherwise, you'll fool yourself. And at the end of the Cold War, we said it was the end of history. Everybody's going to accept liberalism. And what happened? We didn't realize that unless we cultivated the democratic elements in Russia, we would end up with, when Yeltsin appointed Mr. Putin as the chief of staff, that was your signal. In 1999, Yeltsin passed a decree saying, I want 10,000 battlefield, highly accurate, small nuclear weapons with which to fight the West. That was April 30th, 1999. You can't find that in the media, even though it was done publicly. There was no mention of it because we were rapturous about, and we kind of forgot about where terrorism was coming from. Remember, Condi Rice said, yeah, I guess they were at war with us, but we weren't at war with them. So I plead with you, religious faith has an enormous role to play in American security policy. When we get it right, that's the quintessential thing about America. And you can't overemphasize that. And in my view, I thought what Congressman Green said was fabulous. And Kat, thank you again for these conferences that you do. And we're going to hope to see that we can get Ukraine on the right side and get Israel on the right side and end these horrible conflicts. But again, unless we're morally clear about what we're fighting, it's going to be very difficult.
It's a really interesting point of view because usually we talk about conflicts in religious freedom issues, right? It's a lot of publications, but you give to us a really like fresh point of view. So let's move also to other position and as you know, American First Policy Institute, more conservative think tank. So if you can explain also like your vision on situation in Middle East and Ukraine, similarities and differences, and also maybe prepare us to some solutions.
Yes, thank you. I want to piggyback on what you said. I think it's a really important point to understand the role of religious faith and moral clarity and understanding the moment that we're in. And I think that religious faith and moral clarity comes from understanding the fundamental story that religious claims are making.
Yeah.
And understanding that fundamental story. This is one of the reasons, in hindsight, that the Gulf War experiment and what we've done for the last 25 years didn't work necessarily. I don't think it worked because we didn't understand the role that faith really played in the story there. We thought we could just bring democracy into Iraq, and that's not something that works. And President Trump was in Riyadh this last week, and he was speaking to our Saudi friends and partners, and he was excoriating the globalist endeavor. And he said, this endeavor has failed. And he celebrated Saudi Arabia for all of the faults that they have, just like the United States, but he celebrated them because they built something not on the model of the US, but on the expression of the Saudi culture and the people with their faith, with their moral clarity as they understood. And he was seeking to join forces and relationships, not with an American view of how foreign policy ought to happen, but with an American connection to the way the world understands itself. And so that's part of what the America First Policy Institute and the America First Policy ideals are all about. It's not about America First is not America alone when it comes to security policy. It's not isolationism. Certainly there are elements on all sides that want to be isolationist, but the fundamental idea is a first principle that you have to get right the fundamental story, is that people are made in the image of God, that we have an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that in an individual person rests a sovereignty that can't be infringed upon by an elite governmental academic power structure. When you have that fundamental story, you understand the proper framing, that will influence all of the decisions you make in foreign policy, the stuff that Chairman Green and what he does on the Homeland Security Committee, we protect ourselves because we believe fundamentally that we have a right to life, that every individual is unique. You look at totalitarian regimes, they don't share that same worldview. It's a fundamental shift in the understanding of story. And so one of my roles at the America First Policy Institute, I oversee all of our digital media, putting things out on social media. In Washington, politics deal with the very specific small audience. In digital media, we're talking about a large audience. And I'm constantly trying to remind my leaders and tell stories on the internet that connect to the American public and connect to the hearts of the global community that see the world inside of story. And so when we understand that fundamental story, we're able to rightly align ourselves, and that's where I believe moral clarity comes from. And as a person of faith, ordained pastor, worked in the film industry and written a novel, and I get the faith political convergent story. But fundamentally, it all boils down to we're made in the image of God. And anything that we do in policy that strips that, weakens that, lessens that, is leading us down a path that I think will ultimately lead to societal collapse.
Thank you. Very deep idea. Ambassador Herbst, I also want to ask you about this narrow audience, right? Because now, even Washington DC very polarized. I feel it, for example, in my experience. Also, even kids talk about elections. So even my daughter in second grade, she talk about elections and about like concepts of ideology. So how to build peacekeeping and peace building concept in so polarized world, and maybe to ignore some like media waves is 2 billion budget, because you pretty well in this in this work. So explain please to us also how to survive in this wave of polarization and how to build concepts for Israel and Ukraine.
All right, I think I understand the question, but I apologize in advance if I did not completely understand it. It seems you're raising two things that were somewhat distinct. On the one hand, you were talking about polarization, so I think you were talking about polarization in the United States.
Yes.
Okay. And then you were also talking about trying to achieve a legitimate peace, a durable peace in both the Middle East and in Eastern Europe. Regarding the first question, you should understand I come at this as someone who's conservative by nature, who understands the point made by many speakers here about the importance of religion in a stable, just society. And sadly, I think that the United States is more polarized today than at any time in my intellectually active life, say going back to when I was in high school in the late 60s. And I think that the two parties are being driven by their wings. And in the relationship between those two parties, and why I lean more again toward the right, we see the prevalence of, to use an inadequate English word, resentment against the other party, which drives politics in the wrong direction. So the extremes on the one side point to the extremes on the other side to justify their own, let's say, not particularly reasonable policies. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave that comment there and go to the other question. We face, as I said in my early remarks, an extraordinary challenge today that did not exist at the end of the Cold War, and arguably a challenge greater than the challenge posed by a totalitarian Soviet Union on the march during the Cold War. We, the United States, have the power, a power which is not just the United States alone, but the power of our allies and partners to deal with this challenge. Because of the failure of American policy in 20 years during the global war on terrorism, American activism has been partly discredited because the policy was a failure, and the architects of that policy in both Republican and Democratic administrations never paid a career price for their failures. And I felt that when I was working on failed states in my last job at the State Department, and when I was working at NDU after that in the from 2010 to 2014. But there is a tendency in life, including in the United States, for people to learn the wrong lessons from the last war. Mm-hmm. So we were arrogant and fundamentally stupid in the way we tried to remake Iraq, and for that matter, Afghanistan, although we had to go into Afghanistan after 9/11. But as a result of that, and as a result of the failure for there to be a reckoning, which we desperately needed, some people more on the right than on the left, but on the left too, analogizing from our failures in Iraq and Afghanistan, that even providing support to a country, economic and military support, but not soldiers, is somehow the same failed policy that we pursued in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they are dead wrong. Because as I pointed out in my remarks earlier, those four countries, but most dangerous for the United States, China and Russia, are coming after us. They want to have Ukraine for breakfast, but they want to have us for lunch. And the smart way, the least expensive in treasure and lives to stop this danger is to arm Ukraine to stop Russia. If Biden had not been intimidated by Putin's nuclear threats, we could have done that easily 2 years ago. We didn't.
Yeah.
I thought that the speakers before me were brilliant, but I disagree that we have the inability now to help Ukraine kick the Russians out of at least a substantial portion of Ukraine. Because I'm a realist, that is not my policy objective, because Donald Trump won the election and his view is different from mine. If he pursues his stated policy in a way that meets American interests, to make sure that the aggressor in that war, the party that is unwilling to accept Trump's terms for peace, pays a price by putting substantial pressure on the Kremlin. If Trump does that, he can achieve his objective of having a durable peace. But right now, we see some waffling. And amazingly, the administration is pursuing Obama's ridiculous policy of a reset with Russia, which is exactly the opposite of the economic war that Ronald Reagan waged against the Soviet Union. And there are even people in the administration talking about returning Russian gas to European markets, which not only would restore European dependence on a hostile power, but would remove American natural gas from the European market. So it's a hit against American security and American prosperity. Talk about dumb. Having said that, I think President Trump will ultimately do the right thing, especially if he wants a Nobel Peace Prize. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. Always a pleasure to listen your points because of so big experience. So my second question to Peter and to all panelists, and it will be the last question in this panel. It's question generally, what can be generally main algorithm and most effective strategy of winning the wars against authoritarian regime? Is it economical cooperation with Ukraine and with Israel? And it can be the same because of concept that Americans will keep their money, right? And with Israel, it generally work. So even a lot of Israeli companies here, trading on stock markets, cooperation is great. Or it's more, something deep that we will support the state because it's right? Because in Lech Lecha chapter of Torah that it's part of Israel, part of land for Jewish people, and Ukraine it's independent country and Russia is aggression. So it's more deep value issue or economical issue or something else I don't know, alliances and some geo-economical issues. What we must work more.
My view is whatever you can do to kick Russia out of Ukraine, do it. And do it as quickly as possible. Because all you're otherwise, as Victor Hansen points out, is you're turning Ukraine into Verdun, 1917. It's just a meat grinder, and we're just killing. And the question is, how much more can we, Ukraine, grab from the Russians, and how much can the Russians grab from Ukraine? And how long are you going to decide, okay, when do we... Now, can we put enough pressure on Putin cutting off his gas? I mean, they made a deal with and they said, well, you can't sell your gas for more than $60 a barrel. Well, whoopee. You just gave all of Europe and China a discount and continued to finance Russia. And guess who's making up the difference? The Chinese. And they're getting a discount on gas to begin with. So they're getting all the benefits from the alliance with Russia, and they're not really paying. So my question is, I don't care whether the deal with Ukraine is economic, I don't care whether it's political, I don't care if it's diplomatic. They're allies and friends of ours. They're no threat to Russia, and everybody should know that, for God's sakes. But Russia takes over Ukraine, there'd be an enormous threat to everybody in the region. Not just the Baltics, but Poland and Romania and all the rest of it. And we can't have that happen. Now, Putin's a thug. And I don't know, I read Carlo Kopp stuff and my friend Steve Blank, And I get a sense that Russia has some very serious economic problems, but they're like the Chinese. They lie. And you don't know a lot of the data that you'd like to see. So what do you rely on? Expatriates that go to Russia or they don't, and then they tell us, well, it's really this bad. I understand where the president's coming from. I think he's saying, in the absence of being able to kick Russia out completely, how much do we wait until Ukraine gets the leverage, as he said, cards? Because that's basically what we're talking about. Who has the lever to gain something from a deal? And when does Putin realize that he can be hurt very seriously financially? I understand people worry about, well, what is he going to tell his people about why he did all this? And my view is, who cares? He'll lie about something, which is what he does. And my view is the ambassador is 100% right. We got intimidated by Russia's nuclear threats, and so we took our deterrent off the table. In 2014, President Obama said, it's not our concern. Okay? At least Mr. Trump gave them javelins, which enabled them to go after tanks. And then in 2022, in December 21, the president said, well, we'll respond, but it depends upon how much of Ukraine he grabs. And then a couple days later, they said, oops, we really didn't mean that. Well, the horse is out of the barn, and Putin heard it. And the question is, does he then say, that's really what you think? And you shouldn't have said it, but... So if you go back to 94 and not preparing Ukraine, and then 2014, not responding, and then 22 kind of mixed signals, and then you take your deterrent off the table and say, Mr. Putin, you're not going to use nuclear weapons because then you die. That's the last thing you're ever going to do. Okay? So we're going to arm Ukraine to the extent we need to arm Ukraine and kick your ass out of Ukraine. Excuse my French. But we didn't. We said, we're worried about escalation. Bingo. That's exactly what Putin wanted. And he just brandished, how many times has he brandished nuclear weapons? Dozens and dozens of times. I mean, I'm in the nuclear business. This is what I do for a living. Okay? I don't think I should just say it's bluff, because I think he's reckless enough to use them. On the other hand, we have a deterrent. And we ought to put it on the table. I mean, that whole point is, if Ukraine was a member of NATO, we'd have to put our nuclear deterrent on the table. That's the whole point of making somebody part of NATO. But if they're not part of NATO, well, our nuclear deterrent is like, well, it's a little iffy. That's not the right signal to send to Mr. Putin. And my view is, it's a tragedy that we will not be able to get, at least I don't think we'll be able to get for Ukraine what they deserve and what they want. But the question is 85% of your country better than 50%? Yeah. Is 100% better than 85? Yeah. The question is, can you get it? And I talked to a lot of my military friends, and I said, do you have a military plan that you can tell me on the table that you can go to Congress and say, you give us X billions of dollars, in the next 2 years, we can win this? I haven't seen it. And I think the Russians have put landmines and instructions everywhere where you're going to have to clean that country a yard at a time to go back and get places of the Donbass and Crimea and so forth. So sorry, Kat, but to me, this is the most important national security issue of our time, along with Iran.
Thank you. So we discovered nuclear issue. Adam, what do you think of perspective, maybe more on Israel? So what is more important issue, like economical, pace, maybe something else?
About Israel, well, I would just make a comment. I'm not smart enough to know what to do in the Ukraine, but I do think that NATO is going to play an important role in that.
I agree.
And that we need to see what a long term. I mean, you can negotiate a ceasefire and have momentary peace, but what is the long term solution? And I think the NATO role. One of our guys, chairman of our Center for Law and Justice, Matt Whitaker, has been appointed as U.S. ambassador to NATO, and I'll be very interested in seeing what the Trump administration pursues there. As it relates to Israel, I think that there's complex issues all across the board, but my focus is quite a bit, like I said earlier, on storytelling. I think one of the things in Israel that would be really good for the security and the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, and even inside of Israel, is for that younger generation to understand where they came from. And the stories of Israel, not just as a modern nation state, but as something that God had in his heart for thousands of years. And that next generation of people, that upcoming generation, the young people in Tel Aviv, those that are going to be leading the nation, I think they need to really understand, as they fight for their nation, they need to understand the roots of their nation. Not just that they were birthed in 1948 through the Balfour Declaration and all of the histories. Like, meaning is not carried through propositional truth. It's nested inside of stories. And if that next generation of Israelis understand that, they will be able to rightly confront the threats and to build and forge the lasting bonds of peace between opposing worldviews, because they understand that story.
Thank you. And Ambassador Herbst, please conclude also what issues you think the most important for stable peace building.
Again, the challenge we face is that there are four powers and some smaller powers beyond them who are fundamentally hostile to the United States, its allies, and its friends. That's the beginning of wisdom. In Ukraine, it's very clear. While I think that I would prefer us to have a more ambitious goal in Ukraine than President Trump, his stated objective is a reasonable one. And if he pursues it properly, he can achieve a durable peace. And what that would mean is, A, following up on his initiative, the week the mineral deal was signed, more American weapons would flow to Ukraine to make sure that Putin understands he's not going to be able to grab one more centimeter of Ukrainian territory. And two, the promised economic sanctions. And by the way, I think the most influential man in the Trump administration pushing the right policy to stop Russia is Bessent.
Yes.
Because he is not facing challenges from the quasi-isolationist wing of the party that others like General Kellogg and Secretary of State Rubio face. You do those two things, Putin's got a much larger problem than he has today. And that might persuade him, I'm not saying definitely will, but might persuade him to agree to durable peace terms, which right now he's not willing to do. And right now, they're having a phone call. And I am confident Putin's telling Trump that, I love what you're doing, Mr. President. Just tell those Ukrainians to offer us some more stuff and we can have a peace. And it should at least enable Putin to take control of Ukraine, because that's his objective. On the Middle East, I am gobsmacked, as I think I suggested in my early remarks, by the sudden waffling of American support for Israel. Now is not the time to waffle, because the Iranians, although much reduced in power because of those brilliant Israeli moves, especially the covert stuff, which took out which basically neutered Hezbollah. Now is not the time to weaken support for Israel. The only serious actions against the four have been Israeli actions against Iran. Let's help them make that permanent. Thank you.
Thank you. It's amen. Let's make it permanent. And thank you so much for this panel. And I will invite next moderator Ezra, our friend and partner. He also knows a lot of, he also member of Jewish Orthodox Chamber of Commerce and CEO of Freelander Group, and he worked 25 years in government relations and also here on Capitol Hill. So I'm sure he knows a lot of issues about Israel and also about foreign policy on Ukraine.
We're going to be focused on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine, which I think, to me personally, is more important than anything else to understand the human suffering. We all, numbers, casualties, but there's a real, unfortunately, there's a real human dimension behind every casualty, every person who's wounded, every family that's impacted by the war. It's easy for us to pontificate here in Washington, D.C., but obviously when it impacts people on the ground, it's more, it cries out. With me, I'd like to introduce Anna. I'm probably gonna mispronounce your name, excuse me for that. Anna Yabluchkanska? Okay, close enough. Who's the director of the medical aid program of United Help Ukraine, 501c organization receiving and distributing medical defense, food, and other supplies directly to Ukraine since 2014. Anna is a board member and director of the medical aid program and assists in other projects. Anna brings extensive experience from the private and public sectors in Ukraine, the nation of Georgia, and the United States. She's actively engaged in cancer research at a global company and is a devoted parent of triplets. Thank you so much for your participation. I knew that would people would react to that. Thank you. Roman Palchikov, okay, founder and chairman of the charitable foundation, the First Fund for the Restoration of Ukraine, dedicated to rebuilding and strategic recovery. His work centers on state and regional policy, construction and restoration, and internal strategic communication. Mr. Palchikov is a seasoned expert in public administration, emergency services, and regulatory policy with over 2 decades of service in Ukraine's Ministry of Internal Affairs, Ministry of Emergency Situation, and the State Emergency Service. Thank you both for your participation here today. Anna, let's start with you. Based on your frontline experience, what are some of the most urgent humanitarian gaps in Ukraine, and how have faith-based groups uniquely responded to those challenges?
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Is it
Yes.
working? Okay. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's very important to say and to understand that war, unfortunately, it's not only about geopolitics. It's about people. People, their life, their homes, their families, their health. What we see now, thousands and thousands of people are being displaced in Ukraine. Many of them lost their homes forever, unfortunately. Many of them lost their relatives, suffering with physical illnesses and wounds and mental health. And we are, as a non-profit organization, of course, as a first point, we are facing to humanitarian efforts. I'm in charge of medical aid program. We are dealing with patients who are being wounded. So we work with hospitals across Ukraine, supplying them with essential medical supplies, equipment, and medications. Over 200 hospitals are being supplied daily by our team on the ground. And it's done because of collaborative work of United Help Ukraine and our partners, as one of them you see here is a Project Cure and many others as well. So for us, it's very important to understand that when we work as a team, it's crucial. We are providing assistance in mental health, and we were lucky to meet some Israeli psychologists at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, who brought to Ukraine a very interesting toy, therapeutic toy called hibuki, which was used to provide a mental health assistance to children suffered by war. And we did trainings for the families and psychologists to work with them. And we even established production of hibuki toys in Ukraine. And over 700 toys were distributed in Ukraine for children. It's very great to see how these tiny, small efforts can bring joy to children. Also, and then this project grew to a new one, which we called SMUHA. We're providing mental health assistance for families with children who are suffering from war. And we have several hubs across Ukraine, and we're also providing trainings for psychologists because we understand that this nation should survive after the war is over. So for us, it's very important to keep people healthy and mentally healthy. Also, we are supporting a lot of medical efforts on the ground. One of our partners in Ukraine, it's called FRIDA, it's Israeli-Ukrainian Medical Association. It's a group of doctors who go to the front lines and provide medical assistance and help for those who don't have access to any kind of medical help right now. And we are cooperating with this team for over for almost 4 years now since the full-scale invasion. And we see that such kind of collaboration really, really helps. We are seeing how religion and churches not only provide like faith, but they also like provide humanitarian assistance. We are cooperating with a lot of rabbis in Ukraine who are working with communities over there and providing mental health, humanitarian effort, and medications as well. So we are happy to assist them in these efforts. So additional to that, we are working in the United States, bringing wounded warriors here for rehabilitation. And currently we have 3 very severely wounded patients who are undergoing treatment in the United States. And as I say, so just being as a team, uniting by countries, uniting by organizations, we are able to do a lot. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roman, we'd like to ask you, how can strategic recovery efforts incorporate spiritual and communal healing? Do you see a role for interfaith cooperation in Ukraine's reconstruction process?
Наразі відновлення України розвивається дуже семимильними кроками, скажімо так. Чому? Тому що попри те, що багато будівель зруйновано, нанесено великої шкоди енергетичній інфраструктурі. Минулої зими в Україні було завдано багато збитків в цій сфері, але завдяки героїчній праці Збройних сил України, рятувальників, енергетиків, Україна не поринула в темряву.
I can say that the recovery is moving very quickly. Why? Because now we restore a lot of buildings destroyed. The energy infrastructure, especially this winter, was heavily damaged, and there were a lot of work this winter. There were a lot of destruction. But we can say that the heroic work of armed forces of Ukraine and energy workers helped to restore, and there were no dark in Ukraine.
Попри великі виклики, які стоять перед державою, громадським суспільством нашим, Україна вже має певну візію, як можна відбудувати і відродити ті сфери, які дуже сильно постраждали, ті регіони, які дуже постраждали. Розвиваються певні програми щодо відбудови житла. І одне з факторів таких дуже важливих і дуже цікавих, те, що дані програми в своїй основі мають певні риси, які намагаються відбудувати все, що було зруйновано, краще, ніж було. Build better. Sorry.
So we have very big challenges, but the state and also the society, they have a vision how to move go on, and we have a vision how to rebuild the spheres that were destructed, also the regions that received the most damage, and we have a special program to rebuild the residential building. And the main focus of this program is to build better than it was before.
Але одною з величайших проблем, яка заважає відновити ті регіони, які дуже постраждали внаслідок війни, це дуже щільна замінованість і забрудненість залишками війни територій.
But one of the main problems that make obstacle to restore the regions that were heavily damaged is the big demining, and there are a lot of regions that have a lot of consequences of war.
Тому одним із основним та першим кроком має бути проведення розмінування звільнених територій, які захаращені вибухонебезпечними предметами. На початок війни, за офіційними даними, території, які були забруднені вибухонебезпечними предметами, сягали площі 174 тисяч квадратних кілометрів. А це площа таких держав, як Сирія, Камбоджа або площа такого американського штату, як Флорида.
One of the main steps is to provide demining territories that where the war has been, and on the beginning of the war, they were estimating that the territories that needs to be demined is 174,000 square kilometers. So it looks like Syria, Cambodia, or U.S. state of Florida.
Тому виклики, які стоять перед українським народом, дуже великі. І завдяки нашим партнерам іноземним ми впевнені, що ми дані виклики подолаємо.
So we have big challenges. They're standing with the Ukraine. They're really big, but we are sure that with the help of foreign partners, we can deal with these challenges.
Завдяки розробленим програмам урядовими та неурядовими органами, а також іноземними партнерами, наразі в Україні проводяться певні програми щодо гуманітарного розмінування територій і в подальшому відновлення даних територій, розбудова їх та повернення до цивільного життя.
With the help of programs as government-led, also with the help of NGO and with foreign partners, Ukraine is making humanitarian demining and moving to restoration of these territories, and the aim is to return these territories to normal civil life.
Thank you. I'd like to for us living here in the US, we read about Ukraine almost on a daily basis, but what are the numbers? How many wounded? We hear the president reference 5,000 troops are being killed on an average on a weekly basis. In terms of the injured, the human cost, what numbers are we talking about? How many injured soldiers are there? How many injured? What are the casualties? If you could just run us through, so behind every number there's a human being. If you can just elaborate on that.
Я не можу вам.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
This is actually a very tricky question because for safety reason, Ministry of Health does not distribute this information. But what we've had on the data back in 2023, at the beginning of the year, we had information about 50,000 amputees in Ukraine. So 2 years ago, 50,000 amputees. So, and we know that current war is a war of drones. So this war is absolutely different from what we had before. So the number of such kind of patients we have more and more. And even worse, one of the topics we are working with is a tactical medicine. So we are training our soldiers who, very often they didn't have any military backgrounds. They're just people who were went to serve to their country And they were learning how to use tourniquets. We all hear about tourniquets, that we all need tourniquets. So up to 40% of all amputations happened because of the tourniquet syndrome. And tourniquet syndrome is acute ischemia of tissues which was developed due to incorrect usage of tourniquets when it's not needed and because of long evacuation. Unfortunately, it's not the US Army when patients can be evacuated in 30 minutes. Sometimes our soldiers wait for evacuation for several days. And this is a very, very sad picture. And what's, I think, modern, like, next wars will be different from all the previous. And what Ukraine shows now, that starting from this point, evacuation will never take 30 minutes in any further time, just because it's a war of drones. Drones won't let the helicopter to land to pick up a patient. So we all need to use this experience and think what to do next and how to save people in all our future conflicts, unfortunately.
Thank you. That's a scary number. Let me just put it to you this way.
Я хотів би додати, що я не можу казати за дані військові, але я можу привести дані жертв, які постраждали від вибухонебезпечних предметів вже на мирній території. Це загиблих 330 людей і більше 1100 людей цивільних, які постраждали. Серед них діти, цивільні громадяни. Це, ще раз наголошую, це там, де територія вважається безпечною. Але враховуючи те, що наразі Росія застосовує ракети з касетними бойовими частинами, я хочу сказати, що безпечної території на Україні взагалі нема.
I would like to add, I cannot say about the military figures, but I can say that on territories that are considered as peaceful, we can say that there were killed 330 people and 1,100 were wounded. So these are civilians and these are children. And I would like to say that this is territories that are considered to be safe. They are considered to be peaceful, but Russia now sends a rocket, so in any territory you can get explosives after such a rocket.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me ask both of you a question. What best practices or lessons can be shared about preserving the dignity, sovereignty, and family values in humanitarian aid, especially in complex environments like Ukraine? Anna, let's start with you.
Well, we all learn on the go. But what we definitely see is that we all should remember that behind all the story is a human life. So as soon as we respect person, life, health, that's what will bring the most important, I guess, in all our future efforts.
We have any questions from the audience? Would be anyone ask the question?
For Latinos United for Conservative Action. So it's come to my attention over the past couple of days that not only is North Korea sending people to fight, but also Cubans. Is that something that you also help with when it comes to humanitarian aid? Because from what I understand, there's been over 300 Cubans that have since passed away alone. And I wanted to know your opinion on that and if there was anything else that maybe we aren't aware of. Thank you.
Well, we of course, any other soldiers that will be influenced to this war will cause more damage and more destruction. So, of course, if there are more, like 3,000 soldiers additionally will be participating, we're expecting more wounded. So for us, we will need to bring more evacuation vehicles, equip them, help hospitals, send supplies, train medics on the ground. We used to train medics, frontline hospitals in first 2 years of war for mass casualty events preparedness plan. And we trained 46 hospitals along the front line. And this is probably something that we will need to think about again and take these trainings back. Because if we will have more casualties, we will need to keep hospitals prepared. Thank you for your question. It's a very, very difficult one.
Ну, я думаю, ми всі розуміємо, що залучення найманців або ідейних комбатантів до бойових дій з російської сторони, з інших держав, це свідчить про те, що це початок Третьої світової війни, і мені здається, що жодна країна не залишиться осторонь.
We all have to understand that Russia is using mercenaries and or combatants who got idea from Russia, and all this mean the starting of the Second World War, and no one live outside.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had a question about the media. This is war, so what type of media is actually telling the story, or journalism? You know, every history has a story. Is this story actually being told? Can we trust the media, the journalists that are getting into behind enemy lines? What type of media is actually getting in behind enemy lines to tell the story? Do you have that information?
Can I invite? No.
So I'll introduce myself. My name is Kateryna. I'm Voice of America. I'm editor-in-chief for Ukrainian service. I'm here in personal capacity because Voice of America is being on administrative leave. In terms of media coverage, the war of Russia against Ukraine is probably one of the most televised. It's happening right in front of our eyes. There is a lot of videos on social media. There is a lot of video which are obtainable through satellite, for recording from drones. Some of the people who are in the trenches, they also, will also receive some of the sort of like user-generated video, but it's actually from the soldiers. So there's a lot of journalists, especially in the beginning of the invasion, who came to cover the war and Ukraine. And I actually talked a lot. I did a story, and I did a round table with reporters talking about the experience, how they work in Ukraine compared to other conflicts that they covered as a professional war reporters. And they were telling there's one thing which is much easier than situations, say, in Iraq or Afghanistan, is because they found it's very easy to work with Ukrainian authorities. They found it's easy to find a nice connection, to find a good hotel. They found that Ukrainian society is very open. They share their experiences. So people share the most painful stories. What they found is the most difficult, and it's much more deadly than what they experienced in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq. You cannot report right from the trenches on so-called zero line. There are no reporters. Occasionally they come, they do a little bit of stories, but it's not like you can go back and forth through the trenches and do it from both sides. It's heavily mined. Somebody mentioned Verdun. This is something what's happening in Ukraine right now. So that's kind of an answer. But of course, they should be, maybe people don't hear enough about the war, not because the war is not happening, but because some of the media prefer not to cover it, or not interested in covering it. They don't want to broadcast those news. But it's excessive.
Do we have any other questions?
And I'll just add that maybe there are a lot of stories that never happen to go to media. Like, I just came back from Ukraine last night, and last week I was in one of the hospitals, so like we are supporting with a lot of different stuff. And then there was one patient, a lady who got wounded after one of the recent strike on Kyiv. Her building was destroyed, her husband unfortunately died, and hospital arranged her, she is bedbounded. So hospital arranged an ambulance to let you go to the funeral of your husband and took you back. So unfortunately, there are a lot of besides the scenes that we do not see, but unfortunately happens.
Thank you so much. Okay, if anyone has a question, this is your time to speak up. Okay. Thank you both. Really appreciate your participation. And I guess the next panel will be in 5 minutes or so.
My name is Shelby McGee. I'm the Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Very honored to be a part of this event. Okay, and we've got our speakers and their microphones. Great. I just want to add that I am a Jewish American woman, so I really appreciate the focus of today on Israel and Ukraine. But as Katya mentioned, I did just return from Ukraine. We're going to turn to this panel looking at a vision for the future after war. But I also just want to make a note following the last panel that we still are in this war and how the war ends matters. So following the focus on the humanitarian, I do want to say that while I was in Ukraine, there was a lot of discussion about peace negotiations, prospects for peace, but I spent time in the bomb shelter because Russia continued to attack Ukraine almost every night and every day. And those of you that know Jewish mothers can imagine the text messages that I was getting. And then I want to acknowledge that even just this Sunday night, you continue to see the stories about peace prospects. Are we getting there? But Russia directed 150 drones just at the Kyiv region, and a 27-year-old mother, Anna, covered her 4-year-old son, Mark, with her body to protect him during the attack. She was killed. Mark was injured in his face. He's at the hospital. They're trying to save his vision, and his grandparents are also injured in the hospital. I think it's important when we're talking about this that, as our last panel said, we bring up the human aspect. So that's how I see how Putin is approaching peace, and the Ukrainian people truly want peace. And when we're talking about peace, I think it's important to remember that that is territorial integrity, sovereignty, and also prosperity. And that's where this panel comes in. Ukraine has a right to be free and also to grow. And I see a lot of potential for the US and Ukraine to grow together. And I think Russia sees that as a threat. So with that, I'd like to turn it to our panel to talk about these issues, what key points you think the audience needs to keep in mind for a post-war Ukraine, for Ukraine now, and anything else you want to end the event with, as you are the last panel. It's now my honor to introduce our distinguished panel. Ambassador Herbst, you've heard from, but he'll be joining us again. And then we have Vadim Melnik, a high-ranking civil servant and expert in economic security, criminal and administrative law. He has over 25 years of experience in law enforcement, fiscal and analytical agencies, and advanced from a junior investigator to head of the State Fiscal Service of Ukraine. From 2021 to 2023, he served as the first director of the Bureau of Economic Security of Ukraine, where he laid the foundation for a new model of combating economic crimes, intelligence-led policing. And then we've got Matt London, a seasoned international business executive with much experience, including at the US Department of Commerce, and now he is an affiliated research at the Center for Eurasian, Russian, and East European Studies at Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service. So Vadim, I'd like to turn to you for any opening remarks on this important topic.
Шановні друзі, шановні учасники молитовного сніданку, я хотів би виступити нашою патріотичною мелодійною українською мовою за допомогою перекладача.
Dear friends, dear guests, dear participants of the Prayer Breakfast, I would like to deliver my speech in a patriotic way in Ukrainian with the help of my assistants and translator.
Я дуже радий вітати вас від імені українського народу.
I'm very happy to greet you on behalf of the Ukrainian people.
Насамперед, я щиро дякую організаторам та партнерам цього заходу, завдяки яким ми маємо змогу бути разом.
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to the organizers and partners of this event. That's what bringing us together.
І особливо подяка конгресмену Марку Гріну та пану Роберту Ілатову за їхню підтримку та відданість справі.
And special thanks to the Congressman Mark Green and Mr. Robert Ilatov for their steadfast support and commitment to this.
Для мене велика честь виступати саме тут, у серці американської демократії.
It's a great honor for me to be here in the heart of the American democracy.
Ми, українці, як ніколи відчуваємо цінність віри, гідності та солідарності.
We Ukrainians now more than ever feel and deeply value faith, dignity and solidarity.
У цей час, коли ворог намагається зламати нас не лише ракетами, а й страхом, ми залишаємося вірними свободі, гідності і нашому життю.
At these days when our enemy is trying to break us down not only with the missiles but also with fear, we remain committed to fight and we believe in freedom, dignity in life.
Але сьогодні я хотів би розповісти вам не про жертву, а про силу.
But today I would like to talk to you not about the victimhood, but about strength.
Про те, як навіть у найтемніші часи наш народ не втрачає віри.
About how even during the darkest moments our Ukrainian people are not losing their faith.
Я особисто бачив, як мирна Буча під Києвом у 22-му стала символом звірства і водночас людської стійкості.
I personally witnessed how a peaceful city of Bucha in 2022 became a symbol not only of brutality but also of human resilience.
Я особисто бачив очі людей, які втратили все, але не втратили здатність боротися.
I personally saw the eyes of people who lost everything but did not lose their will to fight.
До речі, я так само там живу.
By the way, this is where I live as well.
І я знаю, ворог помилився, нас не зламати.
And I know for sure that the enemy made a mistake and we cannot be broken.
Коли український народ намагаються поневолити, ми даємо обов'язково відсіч і не лише на фронті, а у кожній сфері, від культури до економіки.
When somebody is trying to enslave the Ukrainian people, we fight back, and not only in the battlefield, but in the areas of culture and economy.
На економічному фронті, де я маю честь працювати, кожен мій крок був і залишається спрямованим на захист фінансової стійкості нашої держави.
On the economic front where I work, my every step is determined to be focused on the strengthening of nation's financial stability.
Мій досвід у податковій службі та в управлінні Бюро економічної безпеки України навчив мене. Бюджет – це не лише цифри.
My experience in the tax service of Ukraine and heading the Bureau for Economic Security has taught me one thing, that budget is not just the numbers.
Бюджет – це про силу армії, про школи, які мають працювати, про довіру громадян.
The budget is about the army, about the functioning of the schools and about the trust of the public.
Сьогодні ключовими пріоритетами економічної безпеки залишаються
Today, key economic priorities of Ukraine include
детінізація економіки,
bringing the shadow economy into light,
боротьба з фінансовими злочинами,
combating financial crimes,
прозорість державних закупівель.
Ensuring the transparency of the public procurement.
Дуже важливо сьогодні для України недопущення виведення капіталу за кордон.
And it's extremely important for Ukraine to prevent the withdrawal of the capital abroad.
І підтримка доброчесного бізнесу.
And supporting honest businesses.
Так як кожна гривня в тіньовій економіці, це втрачені можливості для нашої перемоги.
Because every hryvnia and every dollar lost into the shadow economy is a lost opportunity for our victory.
Україна сьогодні не лише обороняється, вона і створює.
But Ukraine is not only defending today, Ukraine is also creating.
Українська економіка навіть під обстрілами живе.
Even under the bombing and shelling, Ukrainian economy is living.
IT-компанії впроваджують інновації, фермери сіють, підприємці працюють і платять податки.
IT companies are innovating, farmers are sowing, and entrepreneurs are paying taxes and keeping people employed.
І це на сьогодні героїзм зовсім іншого рівня. І він має бути поміченим, саме цей героїзм нашої України.
And this is a heroism of a completely different level, completely different dimension, and I insist that it needs to be seen and acknowledged.
Україна на сьогодні має величезний потенціал, і я хочу поділитися конкретними прикладами.
For the moment, Ukraine still has an enormous potential, And I would like to give you several examples.
Наш IT-сектор один із найдинамічніших у світі.
Our IT sector is one of the fastest growing in the world.
Тисячі українських стартапів створюють продукти, що конкурують на глобальному ринку.
Thousands of Ukrainian startups are creating the products which are already competitive in the world market.
Агропромисловий комплекс України може стати годувальником не лише Європи, а й всього світу.
Our agricultural complex has the capacity to feed not only Europe, but the whole world.
Наша зелена енергетика, яка потужно розвивається, має всі шанси і весь потенціал вивести нас у лідери відновлюваних джерел енергії.
And our green energy, which is developing very fast, has the real potential to make Ukraine a leader in this area as well.
І це я кажу про конкретні напрямки, які ми готові розвивати разом з вами, з нашими партнерами.
And I'm talking about concrete directions which we can develop jointly with our partners.
Водночас ми не можемо ігнорувати виклики.
Of course, simultaneously we cannot ignore the challenges.
Війна продовжує накладати тягар на кожного українця. Інфраструктура руйнується, родини зазнають втрат, економіка перебуває під тиском.
The war continues to weigh heavily on Ukrainians. The infrastructure is being damaged, the family experience heavy losses, and the economy is under pressure.
Україна сьогодні дійсно втрачає молодь не через байдужість, а через прагнення безпеки.
And Ukraine is also losing its young people, but it's not because of indifference, but because they are seeking more security.
Але ми не маємо права сьогодні ділити українців, які тут чи які там. Не маємо цього робити права.
But we have no right to impose these division lines amongst Ukrainians who are here in Ukraine or those who are there abroad. We have no right to do that.
Ми повинні створити такі умови, і це зараз робиться на рівні держави нашої України, щоб кожен, хто вже виїхав, він захотів сам повернутися до безпечної, гідної, сучасної України.
We must create the conditions, and the work is being done already by the Ukrainian government, so that all the people who left Ukraine would be willing to come to a safe and prosperous Ukraine.
Ми маємо берегти молодь не лише від війни, а і від їхньої зневіри.
We must protect our youth not only from the war, but also from despair.
Ми маємо визнавати права людини не як абстракцію, а як основоположний принцип нашого майбутнього. Це є основою.
And we must uphold the human rights not just as an abstract idea, but as the key foundation of our future.
І, до речі, безпека – це не лише про зброю.
And also, security and safety is not only about weapons.
Це про довіру, справедливість, стабільність.
It's about trust, stability and justice.
Це про інституції, які працюють, і про лідерів, які відповідають за свої слова своїми вчинками.
It's about the functioning institutions and the leaders who actually turn their words into action.
І наш сьогоднішній діалог має йти далі, від завершення війни до побудови справедливого і тривалого миру.
And our dialogue today must go beyond just talking about ending the war. We must be talking about just and lasting peace.
Разом із нашими партнерами – це США, це Європа і всіма, хто підтримує свободу, ми можемо створити світ, де сила права переважає над правом сили.
Together with our partners, and I'm talking about the United States, the European Union, and everybody who supports freedom, we can create a world where the rule of law prevails over the rule of force.
Я переконаний, що економічна стабільність – це не менш важливий інструмент захисту, ніж будь-яка інша форма оборони.
I'm convinced that economic stability is one of the important forms of defense, same as important as the military.
Щоб досягти процвітання, ми маємо інвестувати в прозорість, підтримувати підприємців і цінувати саме людський капітал.
And if we want prosperity, we must invest into transparency, we must support entrepreneurship, and we must value the human capital.
На сьогодні сильна економіка – це фундамент сильної держави.
Strong economy is the foundation of a strong state.
Але економіка не може існувати без людей. Саме тому ми прагнемо повернути віру саме тим людям, хто виїхав, хто сумнівається і хто втомився. Нам треба вони в Україні. Їм треба повертатись.
But of course, economy cannot progress without people. That's why we're investing so much effort into convincing the people who left that they should return. This is our priority.
І ви знаєте, я звертаюсь до нашої молоді, до талантів українських, які зараз перебувають за кордоном. Україна потребує вас.
And they always turn to the young people, to the young Ukrainians abroad, and I underline that we need you. Ukraine needs you back.
В цей час ми працюємо над тим, щоб зробити нашу країну простором можливостей, місцем, де інновації процвітають, а інвестори бачать не ризики, а перспективу свого розвитку і розвитку нашої держави.
And we are trying now to make Ukraine as a place of opportunity, where innovation thrives and investors see not risk, but rather a potential.
Сьогодні громадяни України чітко артикулюють запит. Потрібні мирні умови для розвитку, умови, де бізнес зростає, а молодь бачить майбутнє саме в Україні.
Today, the Ukrainian citizens are articulating a very clear demand: a country with the conditions where the business can prosper and when the young people can see their future.
Але ми не прагнемо і не закликаємо до революції. Революції руйнують усе на своєму шляху.
But we are not calling for any sort of revolution because revolutions are ruining everything on their path.
Ми прагнемо і пропонуємо еволюційний шлях розвитку. Розумний, системний, але безкомпромісний.
We seek rather evolution, a way of development that is thoughtful, systemic, but still uncompromising.
Сьогодні Україна стоїть перед історичним шансом.
Today, Ukraine is actually on its historic crossroads.
Не просто відбудувати зруйноване, а створити нову модель держави. Сучасну, ефективну, відкриту.
Not just to rebuild what has been destroyed, but to create a new model of the state, modern, efficient and open.
Але цей шанс залежить від здатності суспільства і політиків діяти спільно. Це в тому числі та єдність, про яку сьогодні казав Марк Грін і про яку казали всі ми – єдність.
But whether it's going to be possible to deliver depends deeply on the ability of politicians and the society to cooperate, to be together. And this is kind of unity that was mentioned in today's discussion, and I'm standing behind this. I support this idea.
Так, на сьогодні перед Україною і перед всіма нашими партнерами виклики дуже великі.
Of course, both Ukraine and our partners are facing tremendous challenges.
Але досвід останніх років довів, ми здатні подолати найскладніші перешкоди. Питання лише в тому, чи скористаємося ми цим моментом.
But the experience of the past several years has demonstrated that we are able to overcome the toughest obstacles. The question is whether we are going to take this chance.
Шановні друзі, ми вдячні Сполученим Штатам за допомогою. Допомога, яка була зброєю, санкцією, гуманітарною підтримкою і вірою в нас.
Dear friends, we're extremely grateful to the United States for the assistance and support in arms, in sanctions, in humanitarian assistance, and also in faith, which means believing in Ukraine.
Але ми також розуміємо, ніхто не зробить нашу роботу за нас.
But we also fully understand that nobody is going to do our job instead of us.
Ми розуміємо, що майбутнє саме в наших руках, в руках українців.
We understand that the future is in the hands of Ukrainians.
Сьогодні ми повинні бути єдиними – політики, суспільство і бізнес.
Today we must be united, politicians, society and business.
Це на сьогодні тест на нашу зрілість.
And this is the test for our maturity today.
Ми будуємо країну, де мир не мрія, а норма.
We are building a country where peace is not a dream, but a norm.
Де молодь не їде, а повертається.
Where young people are not leaving, but returning.
Це наш шанс.
This is our chance.
І це шанс для всього світу довести, що свобода перемагає.
And this is the chance for the whole world to prove that freedom wins.
І я повторюсь, ми маємо скористатися цим шансом, ми ним скористаємося.
And I'm going to repeat myself, we need to seize this chance, to take it, and we are going to take it.
Я вірю, що з Божою поміччю та спільною роботою ми обов'язково впораємося.
I truly believe that with God's help and with joint work, we will succeed.
Ми відновимо нашу землю.
We will rebuild our land.
І ми збудуємо нову країну, країну безпеки, гідності і прогресу.
And we will build a new Ukraine, a country of security, dignity and progress.
Слава Україні! Дякую за увагу. Дякую за увагу.
Thank you for those powerful words. Now, Matt, I'd like to turn to you to talk about your work at Georgetown and how it relates to Ukraine.
Terrific, thank you. Добрий ранок, Boker Tov, Shalom, good morning. I'm also pleased to be here, and I'll start briefly on a personal note. I spent a couple of years in Israel in the late 80s and early 90s, mostly on kibbutzim, and then spent most of my professional career in the business world, working in the former Soviet Union and, of course, Ukraine, where my company had a joint venture. We did a lot of business in the railway sector. And today, as I'm going to be talking to you about, I'm at Georgetown and excited to share with you an exciting program that's being developed there. But what I wanted to say on a personal note was, I have to say that earlier, I'm not sure I felt, sensed, or really intellectually understood the connection between Israel, the United States, and Ukraine that clearly I see today. My favorite, or one of my favorite Ukrainian journalists is Vitaly Portnikov, who's constantly on Israeli media outlets, and he's making this point rather vigorously that, you know, these three countries and the ideas behind them and their situation, we really are in one camp. So just from my own life, I'm seeing new things, and I'm very happy, therefore, to be in this room that unites Israel, Ukraine, and the United States. So what I'm here to speak to you about briefly, and then maybe in the question and answers, I'd be happy to talk about the business and economic and maybe U.S. Business interests in Ukrainian reconstruction. But I'm here to tell you that at Georgetown University, at the request of First Lady Zelenska, who when in Washington about a year ago in July, had requested that Georgetown take up the call and establish a Ukraine studies program. Now, there are other Ukraine studies programs in the U.S., maybe most notably at Harvard, where the great historian Sergei Plokhy is the head. But as I'm going to quickly tell you, the vision for Georgetown's program is a little bit different. So as I understand it, the First Lady has a global initiative to establish Ukrainian studies programs in several places around the globe, and here in the U.S., the hub would be at Georgetown. I can. As I said, Georgetown has taken up this call, and just a couple of weeks ago, and the ambassador spoke at it, and certainly Kateryna was there. We had a launch event on May 6th. By video, President Clinton spoke, Secretary Clinton, as well as First Lady Zelenska, Ambassador Makarova, and other dignitaries spoke at this event. And the only thing I want to read to you here is the three goals of the program, which I'll explain why maybe, or not maybe, why they do differentiate the vision for this program. So the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown is arguably the most prestigious school, not only here in the U.S., but globally in international relations and foreign service. So the goals of the program, and the idea is to endow a chair in Ukraine studies and then to build a program around that is to educate the next generation, not of academics, though I'm sure there'll be a few along the way, of U.S. policymakers, international leaders, and global change makers with a greater understanding and appreciation of Ukraine, including in the fields of international relations and security, economic reconstruction, the theme of this panel, and democracy building. Second goal, provide Ukraine with a respected seat or another respected seat, as we have Ambassador Herbst next to me, at the table in Washington's academic and public policy ecosystem. As you understand, this is a town that makes a lot of important decisions, and there are a lot of events like this where Ukraine's voice needs to be heard. And then on the reverse side, a third objective of this vision is to enrich learning at Georgetown and the wider academic community with an important new voice. I think we would all acknowledge that Ukraine's voice has not always been heard. I'm a perfect example of that. I went to school in the 90s, did my MA at Georgetown, and it was the Soviet Union and Russia that had most of the focus. And I'm doing my penance now for that earlier. It's just the way it was back then. So we understand we're in a new period, and I think that by studying and developing our expertise in Ukraine, we not only strengthen Ukraine, but we further our own understandings and capabilities in international relations and security. So I'm going to be hoping that a few of you will be interested in learning more. We can chat about it during the schmoozing. And if anybody, we've just started this fundraising. It's a big ask. So if anyone here is interested in becoming a donor, financial donor, I'd be pleased to put you in contact with the advancement office at Georgetown, and they would be pleased to talk with you. So anyway, those were my thoughts on the Georgetown program. It will have an economic reconstruction component to it. And again, if during questions and answers there's questions or thoughts on how U.S. business is looking at Ukraine, I'd be happy to offer my thoughts.
Thank you very much. Now, Ambassador Herbst, we've heard some of your thoughts on the political, but I'd like you to tie in any additional thoughts on this topic of a vision for the future after war. Katya mentioned earlier this minerals agreement. How does that fit in, and what do you see for the U.S. and Ukraine together economically? And any other points you want to add in, and I can give you my mic if needed.
Thank you. Before I answer your question, which I will do, I want to put in a plug for this Georgetown initiative. And I'm going to give you a very important national security reason. Russian studies in the United States were really given a strong push as a result of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. There was a wave of prominent Russian intellectuals who fled Russia. In fact, there was a ship of geniuses, which took a lot of them out. I think it was the late teens or the very early 1920s. And a lot of them wound up in the United States, including two first-rate historians, George Vernadsky, who arrived and began to teach at Yale. And I always get this name slightly wrong, so forgive me if I don't get it right now. An equivalent scholar, Mikhail Karpov or Karpovich, I forget, at Harvard. Now, they were excellent historians in the Russian tradition. And there is what I call Russian imperial history, which essentially teaches that all the quote-unquote little people on Russia's periphery are naturally part of the Russian political enterprise, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Empire. And virtually all Russian history taught in the United States since the 20s has taught Russian imperial history as objective history. And that's how I learned history, I might add. I was at Georgetown in the early 70s, got a terrific education, but that part of the education was not as complete as it should have been. And all of my colleagues, including my colleagues who made up a very strong part of the US Foreign Service throughout the Cold War, learned that history too. Now, I only understood that I had been mistaught as I prepared to go to Ukraine as ambassador in 2003. And I wanted to read a Ukrainian historian on Ukraine's history. So I read an important but extraordinarily dry book by a guy named Subtelny, Orest Subtelny. And I remember fighting with the book for the first 150 pages. Because all the things he was telling me was not consistent with what I had been taught and believed literally for decades. And suddenly it dawned on me. I was reading the Ukrainian view as opposed to the Russian view of Eastern European history. The light went on. Sadly, many of my colleagues in the Foreign Service and a largish number of former US ambassadors to Russia have yet to this day understand what I just told you. And it starts in the universities here. That's why this initiative is so important. And I'll tell you a story just to underscore this. There's a wonderful American diplomatic reporter, long retired, named Marvin Kalb. He has actually written excellent books on American foreign policy. But he was taught by Professor Karpovich at Harvard in the 50s, and he was in the PhD program before he turned to journalism. Very talented man, whom I respect. But he learned Russian imperial history, and at his very advanced age has had no reason, although I thought I might have given him one, to reconsider. I shouldn't say I, but my program might have given him one. He wrote a weak book on Putin's war in Ukraine that came out in 2015, which, because he imbibed Russian imperial history as true history, colored his approach. Overly sympathetic to the Russian worldview that Russia had been invaded from the west and the north over centuries, which is true, but never taking into account that, as Putin likes to say, and others like to say, Russia knows no borders. And as Henry Kissinger, who did not quite get this right either, although truly a great man, wrote in his book Diplomacy, I remember reading this in the mid to late 90s, that every day since Ivan III took over as Tsar of Russia in the late 15th century, the Russian borders expanded. It was 100 square kilometers, 100 square miles, every day since then. And so again, American diplomats have not understood this. And we see this in some of the more fatuous statements made by President Obama. Not Biden, he understood it, although his policy was weak. And the current administration, including in particular our special envoy for Russia. And that's a serious problem. So that's why this initiative is very important. What Serhiy Plokhy did at Harvard is critical. I forgot, this is such an important subject, I didn't finish on Cal. So he wrote that book. We panned it in our twice a week newsletter, Ukraine Alert. Now, it just so happened that one of the junior reporters who was taken under the wing of the doyen of the diplomatic reporters in the early 80s was my boss, Fred Kemp, the president of the Atlantic Council, who had been a junior reporter for the Wall Street Journal. So Marvin Kalb called Fred and said, "What's this hit job you guys did written by some Russian nationalist on my book?" It was wonderful. An ethnic Russian wrote that review. So we're able to dispose of that pretty easily. But one last footnote to this. Again, I respect Cal. He's done a lot of great work in his career. So he wrote a book maybe 3 years later on his early years as a professional. So I said, I'll read that book and write a nice review. And so I was going along through it, page 70, page 80, and suddenly this happened. He was a book reviewer as a young journalist because he was working for NBC, I think, whatever it was. And he was actually a scholar, right? He'd become an almost PhD. And he wrote a book written by a Ukrainian professor at Columbia whose name escapes me. And he pans his work as of an extreme Ukrainian nationalist, which of course is a very Russian imperial point of view. So I emailed Serhiy Plokhy, who you referred to, the great historian at Harvard. I said, Serhiy, what can you tell me about this guy? He said, this guy was a pathfinder in Ukrainian studies. I couldn't write that review. The books that have had to slam him again. So this just underscores the problem. Okay, now to your question, Joby. Look, we have a very, very energetic program at the Atlantic Council at the Eurasia Center, essentially pursuing, promoting American interest in Eastern Europe by advocating for strong American and Western policy to stop Russian aggression in Ukraine and to help Ukraine become the democratic, market-oriented, free society that manifestly wants to be. And since there's going to be no reconstruction of Ukraine unless Ukraine wins this war in some fashion. I say in some fashion because I said earlier, Trump's proposal could work for a more than satisfactory outcome, although not a beautiful outcome. But because this is in doubt, we spend most of our time focusing on the war. Also, I have a history, background, dealing with reconstruction of destroyed societies. And I know when efforts are serious in this field and when they're not. And the international effort thus far to address the reconstruction of Ukraine is strong on hot air, weak on actual achievements. Having said that, we pay some attention to that. But first we have to make sure that war turns out right. I have no doubt that once we reach that point, and chances are not 100%, but they're better, well over 50% that will happen. Because I think American policy, after futzing around with this and that, will move in the right direction. Then there will be quality attention paid to the reconstruction of Ukraine. Once the game is truly on. And when that happens, and again, I think that day will probably, but not definitely, arrive. One, international resource will be available. I'm now talking about public resources. Two, if we're smart, and we can't count on being smart, some resources will come from those frozen Russian state assets, the 300 billion or so that are hanging around the international financial system. More assets than that will come from the private sector because big business in the United States and elsewhere understands there are profits to be made. Some assets will be found in Ukraine, albeit capital less than from the West. But human capital in Ukraine is serious, despite the great damage done by the war. We're seeing that as Ukraine has run circles around the Russians in applying the most advanced relevant technology to the battlefield. And I'll be discreet, but major American businessmen have tried to steal Ukrainian IPR, and I'll be no more explicit than that. I don't like lawsuits. And the Ukrainians, because they're not dummies, realized that when they arrived in Ukraine a few years ago as philanthropists. All of these are reasons to be optimistic once the war is behind Ukraine. So I remain, in a very frustrated way, cautiously optimistic about the future of Ukraine, and therefore American interests in Eastern Europe and beyond. Because as my friend Steve Biegun, the former Deputy Secretary of State during the Trump administration, says, there's not one national security challenge facing the United States anywhere in the world that will not be better for us if Putin loses or is defeated or prevented from taking control of Ukraine. And that's absolutely right. So there's reason for us to be optimistic. Oh, by the way, this is important too. When I have this relatively rosy picture of what will come in Ukraine following successful defense of Ukraine's sovereignty, I am taking into account the still very large problem of corruption. That has not disappeared, including under the latest president of Ukraine. Some steps have been taken and they should not be dismissed. They're real. I don't have the exact number in my head because I didn't think I'd be talking about the subject this morning. But Ukraine has moved up like 25 or 26 places in the Transparency International Index of Corruption. I think they're like in the low 100s. They used to be in the mid 100s, which is where Russia is, by the way. So that's positive, but still not good enough, even for government work. And you can be sure that problem will be addressed as Ukraine's expedited admission to the EU takes place, with also some help from the United States.
Thank you very much. So I've got more questions for them, but I also get to talk to Ambassador Herbst a lot. So are there any questions from the audience? You answered everything. Oh, we've got a question back there. Please just give your name as well.
Hi, my name is Rabbi Wasserman. I have a question. I'm not sure if you appreciate the contrarian point of view. I've heard this morning, but if someone would stand in front of you and say, you know what, Ukraine is not part of NATO, number one. I'm sorry. My voice is, I apologize. Let's say you have someone with a contrarian point of view, and I do have a degree in international relations, I have to disclose. So let's say someone said, Ukraine is not part of NATO. It's not in the United States' national interest. They're partially isolationist, but the flavor of the political will is not there in the populace. They say, you know what, they had a good effort, and in order to sound a little rough, and I apologize for this, you'd say we got the Soviet Union on its back, thank you Reagan, and now we're trying to put them on the grave, and it's not working. They're a nuclear power, and it's not worth the fight. And you don't want to test the fact that they would bring nuclear arms to bear. How would you answer that?
Piece of cake. We, right now, and I mentioned this earlier, an important reason why people fundamentally don't understand the critical stakes for the United States in Eastern Europe is that after 9/11, we pursued fecklessly the war on terrorism. And we tried to achieve results in Iraq and Afghanistan in the area of nation building, something I'm familiar with, that we never could achieve. And people learned the wrong lesson from that failure. Yes, we should have learned from that failure not to go into a country that was so alien to the principles that make up modern democracy and think we can move them to become a modern democracy. Our efforts in nation building in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then later in Libya, were destined to fail. Destined to fail. And then we began to misapply that in Ukraine. I can't tell you how many debates I had with that contrarian view when they started by saying, we had this awful policy in the greater Middle East. I said, tell me something I don't know. And I explained to them that Ukraine is not Afghanistan. When the Taliban began their big surge in the summer of 2021, what did Ashraf Ghani do, the president of Kabul? He took the money and he ran. When Joe Biden told Zelensky, get out of town, I'll help you, what did Zelensky say? I don't need a ride, I need weapons. And Ukraine fought and has fought since 2014 as valiantly for its sovereignty and territorial integrity as Israel has fought since 1947. Now, you mentioned nukes. I'm glad you did. It's amazing how a bad idea, when it's presented by one part of the American political spectrum, is adopted by the other part of the American political spectrum. Until Joe Biden, not once in America's diplomatic history did senior American officials say, in a confrontation with a nuclear peer, that we could not take basic steps to defend our security because the other guys have nukes and we may get hit by nukes. Kennedy did not do that during the Berlin Wall crisis. He did not do that during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Biden and his team have said that multiple times. They have been intimidated by Putin's nuclear threats. It's amazing. On the other side of the political spectrum, this became dogma. Tucker Carlson raises it. Laura Ingraham raises it. J.D. Vance raises it. Don Jr. raises it. And they're the guys who say the Democrats are weak. And they've adopted the specific most weak part of Biden's foreign policy. This is not Reagan. Peace through strength. This is appeasement. Now, coming back to American interests in Ukraine. What you need to do, if you are responsible for American national security, is understand both the capacity of your adversaries. So the Russians are the only pure nuclear power we face. They don't have much of an economy. They don't have much of a conventional military, as Ukraine has proved. But they sure have nukes. Although if their conventional military is any example, and maybe their nuclear capacity is less than we think it is. But we can't assume that. But you also have to understand their ambitions, their objectives. And Putin, other senior Russian officials have made clear that their ambition is to knock us off our place in the global security and economic system. They intend not, if they win in Ukraine, if they take effective political control of Ukraine, they're not going to stop there. Do you know what happened in Estonia? 3 days after Obama visited in the late summer of 2014 to reassure the Balts that don't be paranoid about what Putin's doing. This was 6 months after the war in Ukraine began. What did the Russians do? They kidnapped an Estonian security official and brought him to Russia. Do you think the Balts were reassured? If you understand that Putin is going to go beyond Ukraine, and you've let him intimidate you, the United States, out of giving Ukraine the weapons to stop him, what do you think Putin's going to think about the Article 5 guarantee to the Baltic states? And if you think that Putin's not going farther, look at the activities, or rather the decisions made by the people whose national interests are on the line. Sweden and Finland were doctrinally neutral nations for many decades. What happened after the big invasion by Putin of Ukraine? they suddenly got up and joined NATO. And by the way, Putin threatened nukes if that happened. As our colleague said in the panel earlier today, we've seen Putin threaten nukes 15 or 20 times, and every time the red line he laid down to put a nuke against it was crossed, what happened? As they say in Russian, nichivo. As they say in, is it Yiddish? Bupkis, right? Bupkis. So I love debating the so-called contrarians. They don't have legs to stand on. And John Mearsheimer, a great scholar, has disgraced himself over this issue. By the way, I had the opportunity to appear on the same panel with him in a conservative audience to Mount Pelerin Society 18 months ago. To my surprise, I got more applause than he did. That's because there were a lot of Europeans in the audience.
Thank you, Ambassador Herbst. We've got a question right
I'll say a couple of words before I ask the question.
here. Please introduce
Everything I
yourself.
worked with today.
Please introduce yourself as well.
It was working.
I think we could hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There you go. Okay. I'll say a few comments before I ask the question. Everything I've heard today and other meetings I go to for Ukraine remind me of the aspirations for South Vietnam when Kissinger was negotiating his quote with peace. And we know what happened in South Vietnam. We know what happened in 1953 when the French signed peace with South Vietnam. It fell apart. We signed the peace, and what I still consider is that Ho Chi Minh played Kissinger like the fiddle. He got what he wanted. He got a pause. He got us out. North Vietnam rearmed. We attacked and took South Vietnam. And they proved what I keep standing on, that peace only comes with total victory. World War I, World War II, and Vietnam proved that. Unfortunately, in Vietnam, the wrong side won, but they got peace. In Korea, there's no peace. Afghanistan, there's no peace. Iraq, there's no peace. Israel, there's no peace. Why? Because there's no total victory. And all these things you guys said here today, you think it's going to work, all this work about economy, building economy, rebuilding Ukraine. If 5 years from now, Russia repeats what it does, and it'll be more ready, it won't be caught off guard, and it'll be faster. So what do you think is going to happen?
Matt, do you want to try that one?
Probably Ambassador Herbst's would be better. A couple of thoughts. Recently read an old Ed Lutwak piece about you sometimes want to let wars go to their logical conclusion. But I would say a couple of things as it relates to what I spoke about. You know, obviously what we're trying to do at Georgetown is to provide that knowledge and that teaching that will give Ukraine greater strength, our own decision makers greater understanding. So again, I would pitch the importance of what we're trying to do. I'm going to defer to the others. My own belief is that, yes, of course, I hear you, what you're saying. I don't see a pathway to going to Moscow. So if you can't go to Moscow, you're going to have to figure out something in between. It's imperfect, and we're going to have to learn. Again, Georgetown would hopefully be part of that process on how to navigate that sort of situation going forward. So I obviously take your point. It's cleaner, it's better if you could wipe out this regime in Russia. But until that happens from an internal process, unless you're going to Moscow, I think we're going to have to learn how to navigate imperfect conditions.
Do you want to add anything? All right, Ambassador Herbst, why don't you give...
Я можу пару реплік сказати з приводу, наприклад, мінеральної угоди.
I just can say something about the raw materials deal.
Дивіться, це про економіку, так дійсно. Це допомога у розвідці, у видобуванні, допомога Україні стати на ноги. Це про економіку.
So this is of course about economy. So it's how do we explore them, how do we extract them, and how Ukrainian economy gets better back on the track.
Але не тільки про економіку.
But it's not only about economy.
Це про безпеку.
It's about security.
Тому що таким чином ми захищаємо за допомогою партнерів наші мінеральні корисні копалини від агресора і від корупції, яку ми долаємо і успішно долаємо, йдемо прогресивно, але вона ще поки є.
And just because of this agreement, with the help of our partners, we protect our mineral resources not only from the aggressor, but also from corruption. Of course, we are fighting it, but still there is some space for progress.
І разом відбудуємо Україну.
And we can rebuild Ukraine together.
Thank you. Ambassador Herbst, final thoughts?
Look, it's certainly true that the arrangements made for getting out of Afghanistan, which was the right decision, but the arrangements made for doing it were weak and ultimately disastrous. As I already mentioned, our adventure in Iraq was a serious mistake, the way we did it. What you say about Vietnam, I think many people would agree with you, including with a close colleague of Shelby and mine, General Wes Clark. But it's also true that there's also another interpretation, which to my mind is equally plausible. The arrangements that Kissinger made for the peace could have achieved a stable South Vietnamese government if Congress had not pulled the legs out of the Nixon administration's policies in terms of Americans' weapons supply to the South. I frankly disagree with you on Korea. Korea was ultimately a not quite satisfying success. South Korea is not just independent, but it is a thriving economy, a real power, who has positive influence, not just in East Asia, but into Central Asia. Now, of course, that required American troops on the ground to this day. And that's something my colleague at the Atlantic Council, Deborah Kagan, points out in discussing a possible outcome to Russia's war in Ukraine. And that's why the Trump idea of European troops going into Ukraine is a sound one. And hopefully, if this idea, which Europeans are pursuing seriously, will ultimately involve some form of American guarantee to the Europeans. But we can't count on that, but this is plausible. So there is, in our history and in the current circumstances, the materials that could lead to a stable peace in Ukraine, provided serious pressure is put on the Kremlin, both military in form of arms, European troops, and economic.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists for all of your thoughts and your insight, and thank you for the very interesting questions. Sounds like we have more to discuss in the future. And with that, over to you, Katya.
So feel free to ask your questions, our speakers, and to meet your friends. And as Rabbi and Pastor said, it's always good to meet new person because as I remember, Lubavitch Rebbe is like big person with wisdom. Big Rebbe said that sometimes you meet direct person, which you need direct now. So maybe it's a good point to meet somebody also today till 2 p.m. And thank you so much for your contributions. Feel free to visit our website, Institute for Democracy and Development, PolitA, and also websites of our partner, Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, Jewish Orthodox Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for our media team. They do great work, and have a good day. We are here and we open for different type of cooperations.